Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 25th of February 2013. Newcomers, help yourself to the audios at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. You'll see all the official sites listed there. They all carry audios for download. If you find sticking on one, try another one, because lots go into the com at the same time. And they all carry transcripts as well in English for print up. And if you go into Alan Watt Sentinel.eu, you'll find transcripts in other languages to choose from. Number 2, you are the audience that bring me to you. I don't bring on advertisers as guests who scare you for 50 minutes and then sell you their products. I don't have shares in any things that are being sold to make you live forever or whatever. And depend upon you listeners to just keep me going, ticking over. Because that's all you can do in this day and age is tick over. And as we go down the tubes. So if you want to buy the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com or donate, you can also do it from the US to Canada by still using personal checks or international postal money orders from the US to Canada. You can send cash or use PayPal. And across the world, you got Western Union, MoneyGram, and PayPal once again. And straight donations are really seriously welcome. And I go through the history of the big system you're living in and show you how men got together a long time ago to plan this whole society, and what you're going through right now, in fact, is all planned by think tanks which they own. And think tanks work on every aspect of society for every single generation. They're working now on future generations, ones who haven't been born yet, what they'll train them with in kindergarten and throughout school, just as you were too, and you didn't know it, that what you went through was all planned long before you were born as well. That's how incredibly accurate this whole system is. It's very precise, run from the head. And it's the same thing across the whole world. You really have an international educational system through United Nations, and you have all the teachers and their unions on board with it all. They're well paid, like Lenin said and Stalin said. You got to pay the teachers awfully well because they indoctrinate the next generation. Very, very important for those who want to run the world properly. And properly means creating an obedient society that will simply obey commands, be awfully law-abiding, pay their taxes and work, and eventually, hopefully, they'll take a little pill rather than just get sick and die and take money as they're dying from their pension. They want you to just die, and so the governments can grab your pension. That's more efficient that way, you understand? This efficiency is very important in this system. And of course, too, we're all getting the point that we're now superfluous as a population in the post-industrial countries. They really don't need you. And they've been teaching you for years now that really the life is cheap. You're off your pedestal. You've been dethroned and life is cheap. And even the movies that keep churning out simply augment that too, because they're predictive programming. That's what you call all the movies that you watch. They prepare you for what's coming. You don't reason through things. You're enjoying the movie and you're getting downloaded with all things to come in the movie. So when it happens in reality, you say, oh, well, I guess it had to happen. It must be a natural evolution or something. And you accept whatever comes down the pike. Very simple. And of course, you know that Hollywood is completely on board with the Pentagon, and has been for its whole existence, in fact. And they get lots of subsidies from it and complete funding sometimes for movies as well. You just don't get battleships and whole fleets and all that involved in movies just to make a good movie because the military likes to do it and help you out. It's because it's part of the job of the Pentagon is to put out propaganda movies. And Hollywood is awfully good at that. They've been doing it, as I say, from their very first inception. So we're living through a system of big change, and this is the time and age of transitions as they phase out rural America, rural Canada, rural Britain, everywhere else under Agenda 21 to cram you in the slum cities where you'll die off, hopefully, over the next 40 years, according to the big boys. Back with more after this. Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt, talking about the system. It's called the system, you see. You're living in a system. Very, very complex system if you're new to all this, but it's not really complex at all because the boys have been running the world, have been running it for an awful long time via money, basically, the system of money and from the top down. And everything runs on money. No one questions it. No one even questions why these guys have the right to even dish out what they call money to countries, or the right to even print up money for countries, or how it really works at all. We just take it for granted. Mind you, no one's ever going to really do a real thing on it at all or change it. Won't happen. Never happen. Because if the money power is taken away from the money boys, everything would collapse. The whole system of domination would collapse. They wouldn't get the professors into the universities to teach really communistic liberalism or any of these things to change societies and destroy societies. Everything would fall apart as far as their power control would be. So it will never happen. Won't happen. And again, too, Carl Quigley in his Tragedy and Hope and there's also his Anglo-American establishment talks about the Council on Foreign Relations, Royal Institute of International Affairs, coming up with a big plan to take over the world and all of its resources too. Everything you need water, minerals, everything, they own, you see, basically. That's what you've been pushing for years. And they've been buying up countries and their water rights, and they're buying up their lands for produce, for the food. And they also take all the minerals out of the ground for all the different things they want to make and so on. So it's all been happening. And again, you can tie many of the guys together in this, their propagandists of the past, to prove the points. I mean, H.G. Wells was a propagandist for this group and for the Fabian Society, which is one arm of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, because they run left-wing and right-wing. And he wrote a book called The Open Conspiracy. He said, what we're doing, he says, is open to the public if they care to look for it. It's all published, and it's in your library somewhere. The problem is most folk don't read the books, and so they're always confused, and they're kept in the now by the media. And the media keeps you in today's now, what's happening today. All you're reading about is the fallout from it all, but not the cause. But as I say, they published that. Quigley published his books too, to tell you what the whole plan was, and he was all for it, being their chief historian of their own archives, because they have their own separate history, the real history, where they admit they've been behind wars and so on, and they're bringing you towards a new society. Remember one of the members too, Charles Galton Darwin in the 1950s, said that there's always been slavery in one form or another. We're simply bringing in a more perfected form of slavery. You're in it, folks. You're in it. You're all debt slaves, you see. All of you are debt slaves. And you vote for governments that then borrow from the banks and the private lenders. We don't even know what they get in return for this. They won't tell you. One time they should bring in and float around the world, shiploads of gold and stuff, but they don't even do that anymore. But as I say, we're really at their mercy, because everything runs in this world on this thing called money, and corruption, all the corruption runs on it too. And you could never have a decent world at all as long as these guys are in charge of it. It's got to be taken out of their hands. And countries, if they want to be countries at all, remember these guys want to abolish nations. The guys who own the money system, they want to abolish nations. And they've done a darn good job with the creation of the United Nations, which is to help to take over the transition phase. This is the age of transition you're going through right now. The century of change, for those who don't know it. That's what they call it at the top. And they're bringing into austerity. It's all part of the big plan. Now, austerity doesn't mean they're getting it less at the top as they charge you extra for electricity. You still have to use electricity for heating or something. Same with oil and everything else. But it really means that you're going to pay a lot more for a lot less. That's what it is. So they're not losing anything at the top, all these big companies and corporations. And you'll be taught to live in utter austerity. I read an article today about how ludicrous it becomes in countries like Denmark. Even back in the 70s, Denmark openly hired Marxist teachers in schools, high schools and colleges as well. And they're teaching Marxism there. Well, now that group that have all grown up under the Marxism, they're all greenies now, and they're pushing for that all new houses cannot put the old heaters in to heat yourself, or oil or electric. So I guess we're going to just have to freeze to death. This is how mad it all becomes, is to teach you to be austere. Austere, right? Remember too, as a guys too, because even one of the top politicians in Canada said that even if all the climate science and global warming is all a scam and fake science, he says, we'll get our agenda through of redistribution of the wealth. That's the real intention of it. That doesn't mean it's going to other countries to help the countries. It goes to their own international corporations, which are based all over the planet. But it says in this article here, it says virtually all of the big banks' profits come from the taxpayer bailouts and subsidies. Still. And the banks would just about break even in the absence of corporate welfare. Bloomberg noted last year that 77% of JP Morgan's net income comes from government subsidies. Just substitute that from government subsidies to taxpayer subsidies. That's slavery, folks. And he also said, what if we told you that by our calculations, the largest US banks aren't really profitable at all? What if the billions of dollars they allegedly earn for their shareholders were almost entirely a gift from the US taxpayers? Lately, economists have tried to pin down exactly how much subsidy lowers big banks' borrowing costs. In one relatively thorough effort, two researchers, it says Kenichi Yuda of the International Monetary Fund, well, the IMF, they have to take over, remember, too, along with the World Bank, the BIS, for the CFR. And Beatrice Wieder de Moro of the University of Mainz put the number at about 0.8 percentage points. This discount applies to all the liabilities, including bonds and customer deposits. Small as it might sound, 0.8% makes a big difference. Multiplied by the total liabilities of the 10 largest US banks and assets, it amounts to a taxpayer subsidy of $83 billion a year. To put the figure in perspective, it's tantamount to the government giving the banks about 3 cents out of every dollar collected on your taxes. The top 5 banks, JP Morgan, Bank of America Corp, Citigroup, Wells Fargo and Company, Goldman Sachs Group Inc., account for $64 billion of the total subsidy, an amount roughly equal to their typical annual profits. And it shows you on this article I put up at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, their reported annual profits and so on. And it says, in other words, the banks occupying the commanding heights of the U.S. financial industry with almost $9 trillion in assets, more than half the size of the U.S. economy, would just about break even in the absence of corporate welfare. In large part, the profits they report are essentially transfers from taxpayers to their shareholders. It says the money hasn't just gone to the bank shareholders, it's also gone into the pockets of the bank management, which of course we know. But I'll put this up tonight. And just to show you, I mean, this is slavery, folks. Slavery. See, legally, when you vote, you're giving power to someone that you don't know. The ability to pass any law and rule over you on behalf of what? Well, you better look into what your countries are registered as. They're corporations. And they borrow from these bankers. So legally, you're put down as having to work off your share of the debt that's always accumulating. That's why they want everyone to vote. Some countries, they made it a legal necessity to vote, or you get fined or even put in jail. You must agree to be a slave. Now, this article too is talking about, I think it's Wednesday, this is to be published. It's a university study from London that looked into slavery and the fact that the slave owners were reimbursed big bucks when they had to give up slavery. It doesn't go into the shippers, though, the ones who brought them in. We know some of that because they did find massive ledgers. And it was on a documentary last year. I mentioned it, put it on my site in the archives at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, where they got the Rothschilds, who were one of the biggest shippers and buyers of slaves and sellers in the new world at the time. But they found massive ledgers of them. And the Rothschild family came out at the time and said, well, we've made up from that since we've given lots of charity and stuff like that. So this is just about the slave owners, not the traders. And that'd be interesting to get a list of all the rest of the traders, because they're all living in Portugal and Spain at the time, primarily, those guys. And they had massive merchant ships and fleets of them going back and forth to Africa. And they've been doing that for an awful long time, actually thousands of years and other times and periods and places. But it says that the LBS website is the umbrella for 2 projects based at the USL, tracing the impact of slave ownership on the formation of modern Britain. The ESRC-funded Legacies of British Slave Ownership project, now complete, and the ESRC and AHRC-funded Structure and Significance of British Caribbean Slave Ownership, 1763 to 1833, running from 2013 to 2015. This is a project. The encyclopedia contains the identity of all slave owners in the British Caribbean at the time slavery ended in 1833. This is on Wednesday, 27th of February 2013 at 6 p.m. in the Gustav Tuck Lecture Theatre at UCL. Catherine Hall will give a public lecture entitled Towards a New Past, the Legacies of British Slave Ownership, to celebrate the publication of the Encyclopedia of British Slave Ownership and the inauguration of a new project, The Structure and Significance of British Caribbean Slave Ownership, 1763 to 1833, funded by the ESRC and the AHRC. It'll be followed by a demonstration of the encyclopedia. So Wednesday is when supposedly it comes out. And some of the names are quite interesting because lots of the politicians, not so much I know David Cameron's ancestry goes back into that too. And his family goes back into the banking system, of course, because they were involved in the banking of Shanghai and Hong Kong as well, as he told a particular lobby group in Britain who was trying for politics at the time. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix and talking about the big system we're born into that's completely controlled, always was. You're given certain things to choices in life. Of course, you can choose what to eat now and then from this fast food or that fast food or whatever chemical soup that you eat. And things like that, or what club to join, or what side take to. If you've got a chip on your shoulder, there's a ready-made group for you to join. They're all made up for you already, you see, by the guys who run the world. But also, you really have no choices at all when it really boils down to it. Even what's in your head is given to you, again, mainly through fiction. And Hollywood is very good at giving you stories based on true stories. Like they say, based, they should say very, very loosely based on true stories, if at all. Many of the stories actually didn't happen at all, in fact. But during the 70s and 80s, that's when they first started that based on true stories. And then years later it came out that most of them weren't based on any stories at all. They're complete novels. But anyway, it doesn't matter. That's how reality is made for most folk. And of course, they're very good at giving you history, revised history, Hollywood style. And why do you think they pay them so much at the top for these awful movies? It's a vital part, just as important as the military-industrial complex. It's part of it. If you want to run a world, you got to run all the culture. And the Frankfurt School, that's what they majored in, is cultural changes for all the Western nations. And they admit it too. So they've never stopped. And this article here says, Zero Dark 30, the movie, wins the Albert Speer Oscar for Best Propaganda Film. And it says Hollywood history is all the rage these days, but it comes out at a huge cost. One of the most pervasive trends in 21st century Western culture in the 20th century, has become somewhat of an obsession in America. It's called Hollywood history, where the corporate studio machines in Los Angeles spend hundreds of millions of dollars in order to craft and precisely tailor historical events to suit the prevailing political paradigm. And it's very much in fashion. From Lincoln to Dubois, to Black Hawk Dawn to the Iron Lady, they constitute a significant portion of today's major releases. There's only one problem, however, with tailoring a story to fit neatly into prevailing political paradigm. And over the last 100 years, the Germans and the Soviets did this too, with devastating effect. But back then we just called it propaganda. No film embodies the Hollywood historical treatment more than the much celebrated cinema release of Zero Dark 30, directed by Catherine Bigelow, and one of the favourites to grab an armful of Academy Awards this weekend in LA, including Best Picture, Bigelow for Best Director, Mark Bowl for Best Screenplay, and Jessica Chastain for Best Actress. The film's main premise is constructed around a female CIA officer, which didn't happen like this, played by Chastain. They have to do it for fairness, have to put a woman in charge, and her dogged determination to find the highly elusive mastermind of 9/11 and the Al-Qaeda MVP Osama bin Laden. Chastain's performance, critics claim, has also empowered women. So it's all politicized, you see, empowering women by showing her how her film character caught bin Laden, but it didn't actually happen that way in real life, that says. And we'll get to that later, it says. Where the film starts to take heed is with a sensationalization on screen of CIA torture scenes, making it seem like we need to do this. It was to legitimize torture. Unlike previously less celebrated but more integral intellectual cinematic efforts at taking on torture, the rendition and lines for Lambs, Bigelow seems incredibly bent on going the distance to glorify, through her attempt at cinema verite, the troubling practice of torture by the CIA, as a means to glean intelligence about the whereabouts of various Islamic terrorists scattered throughout the world's third world cesspits. And it says, actor Jessica Chastain was unaware that the Zero Dark 30 was a work of total fiction. Total fiction. She didn't know. Bigelow and her writing team's artistic license on the effectiveness of torture even prompted one screen legend, actor Susan Sarandon, to brand the film as a piece of manipulative political entertainment. The veteran human rights defender issued a written statement saying that when watching Zero Dark 30, you should know that the movie has generated controversy because it leaves a mistaken impression, that is, that the CIA's torture of prisoners worked by providing information that led to bin Laden. Now, I've read articles here from the top characters in the US military who were involved and in charge of all the terrorism in the Middle East and Iraq and so on, who said that they were just sending troops out to gather up people in markets. Now, just get numbers and torture them. That's what they really did, folks. It says, in fact, the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee spent 4 years investigating the CIA's torture program, and according to Senators Feinstein and McCain, the CIA's vaunted torture program under Obama did not lead to bin Laden. That's the only true statement you'll ever hear surrounding the government's bin Laden tale. Zero Dark's glorification of torture is merely the first level of moral descent, however, because you see there's still the thorny issue of Osama bin Laden to deal with. One thing that was clear when watching the film, and also by the reactions of theatre goers at the screening at Brixton, South London, that Zero Dark marks a new low point in America's now fashionable politicised culture. The Bigelow must be aware of this because she seemed to play this card shamelessly in her highly politicised film. Never before in the history of cinema has there been such a breakneck rush to complete and release a motion picture so soon after the said event, to serialize the legendary hunt for bin Laden and the greatest manhunt in history by a gallant SEAL Team 6, ending in the siege of the terror kingpin's alleged place of abode, a compound located in Abbottabad, Pakistan. Apparently Bigelow's production was already in motion in May 2011 in advance of the White House announcement that SEAL Team 6 had killed bin Laden. And Bigelow, it seems, was either persuaded herself or decided, it's not clear which, to rewrite the film script to theatrically chronicle what President Obama had put forward as his greatest achievement since taking office. Back with more after this.
You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, and one of the reasons that the US used not to pay carbon taxes, and other countries too, was that the biggest polluters like China wasn't paying carbon tax. So the big boys who own China had a word with China to give a little press release, which they did, saying they're going to introduce a carbon tax in China so that the West would have no excuse not to do the same there. It understands to be a world carbon tax. We're all slaves, it doesn't matter in China or anywhere else. We're all slaves to the system. And this is to change your whole way of living, all the hefty taxes and fees, and where your disposable income, according to Agenda 21, will go to paying for all these fees and fines and all the rest of it, you see. And it says the developing world takes the lead in fighting climate change. So there you go. It says there may be growing murmurs from China that the country may be getting serious attacks or serious about tackling climate change. And yesterday, the news agency announced that China is mulling stricter taxation policies for environmental and resource protection, including a tax on carbon emissions. So now you'll hear it this week or whenever that the US has to really rush ahead and everybody else with carbon taxes, which remember is intended to start with corporations and then get passed on to you. It's already getting passed on to you with the pricing, because they don't pay anything at the top. And then they want personalized carbon taxes for the privilege of living. You see, that's what you're going to get paid for. You have to pay them for the privilege of living. That's where it's supposed to go. But I'll put up this link tonight too. Now we know that the US next job is to grab the resources all across Africa for the big international corporations, the same guys that are owned by the banks. Because the big top banks own these big corporations. All the big ones that you hear of are owned. It's all one big club, folks. And traditionally they've always used your militaries and your people and your bodies and so on, and the taxpayers to fund it all, to go out in the countries and grab all the areas for them so as they can loot it, you see. And it goes on today, it's just the same thing. Anyway, the Dagger Brigade in the US is ready, as it says, for AFRICOM missions. Whoa. And it's from the US Army. And soldiers from the 2nd Brigade Combat Team, 1st Infantry Division from Fort Riley, Kansas, with their Bradley fighting vehicles and so on, are all ready to go. And it says, this is the Kauai helicopter. Oh, you're sure their helicopters are bringing in 2 different brigades of them, and combat teams and infantry divisions and so on. And they're all set to just go in there with everything there is. It's quite a long article, actually. Lots of links on it too, for those who like to look at lovely machines you're all paying for, and weaponry, etc. So America's got a big job to do over there, and it's really pushing to get it done. And of course too, US troops arrive in Niger to set up the drone base, and so they're setting troops in there too. And it's a start of, this story goes back to 2011, but this one's out just recently, February 23rd. But this is how far back they've been planning where to put them. They're also going to put them in Yemen too, by the way. That's another story out today. So the US is really getting in big, because the guys who own America, the corporations and so on, want all the diamonds, golds, minerals, uranium, you name it, water, and of course even all the cropland for themselves. That's what they're going to have in a totally controlled society, for a world society, you see. And also tonight too, Obama mentioned this SAFE fund. It's called SAFE. They also called it America's Energy Security Trust Fund. And it says that back in 2005, the U.S. emitted over 6 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide, an increase of 25 million tons over emissions in 2004. They've got special emissions guys at Gone University. One hand's heavier than the other, and when they kind of balance the act, they can tell as one hand sinks how much they owe, you see. But it says the scientific community agrees that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions from human activities are influencing changes in the Earth's climate. No, they don't all agree at all, so that's a lie. Potential climate changes could have severe economic and environmental implications, blah, blah, blah. So how would America's Energy Security Trust Fund Act work? The bill would impose a per unit tax on the carbon dioxide content of fossil fuels, beginning at a rate of $15 per metric ton of CO2 and increasing by 10% each year, also accounting for inflation. Well, inflation is 10% a year. You better go a lot higher than that. The rate is consistent with the broadly accepted goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Now, most of greenhouse gas emissions is water vapor, folks. That's what you find. Most of it is. And CO2 is a trace gas, which they need for plants to grow. But it doesn't matter. Cons will do, and repetition. And most folk go along with it, you see. You see, it doesn't matter about fact and reality or truth. Interesting little article too says the French Communist Party says adieu to the hammer and sickle. They had that offer of all their existence, the hammer and sickle. So they're placing it with the 5-pointing star of the European Far Left Alliance. And it says the party PCF is replacing the communist emblem of peasants and the proletariat who are ruled by, the elites, communists, with the 5-pointing star representing the European left, a loose alliance of far left parties, including France's Left Front. The move, announced at the party's 36th Congress, which closed Sunday, has angered traditionalists. They really love the old one, the hammer and sickle. It was interesting too, if you look at the old West German or East German, I should say, flag too, symbol, they had the compass, the Masonic compass, and inside it, again, they had the hammer, just like the British one, the British Freemasons have. That's what they have, the hammer inside of it instead of the G. That's what you can do when you've got trained peasantry. You can hammer them, you see, whereas you got to persuade them through other means, like graft, for instance, to join Masons and stuff. Anyway, I'll put this up tonight too. And this article too, I've mentioned it before, is a 2-year-long French feeding study designed to evaluate the long-term health effects of a genetically engineered corn. Found that rats fed Monsanto's maize developed massive breast tumors, kidney and liver damage and other serious health problems. The major onslaught of disease set in during the 13th month. Female rats that ate genetically engineered corn died 2 to 3 times more than controls and more rapidly, while the male GE-fed rats had tumors that occurred up to a year and a half earlier than rats not fed the GE corn. According to results from the 10-year-long feeding study in rats, mice, pigs and salmon, genetically engineered food causes obesity, along with significant changes in the digestive system and major organs, including the liver, kidneys, pancreas, genitals, and more. The EPA admits there's a mounting evidence that Monsanto's insecticide-fighting yield guard corn is losing its effectiveness in the Midwest, so it's not even doing what they claim it does, even for repelling pests. Last year, rootworms were resistant to the toxin in the genetically designed corn-infested fields in Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, and Nebraska. But they have found that it caused, well, they knew that from the beginning, it caused all these tumors and stomach and so on in animals, other mammals, and it's doing the same, of course, with people too, naturally. Naturally, of course it is. It doesn't matter. You see, you've all to die off, supposedly, because all their long-term projections, even for the Department of Defense, see the population is to suddenly plummet around the year 2040. Suddenly. Just like that. They just know these things, you see. Anyway, Nat Rothschild's attempts to mount a boardroom coup at Bumai, it says Indonesian coal miner he co-founded but is now exiled from, came to a head today. So what he's done is gone in there with the shareholders and he wants to place and handpick his own guys to run it by himself. I'll put this link up tonight too. Also, in the Washington Times, it says this article is to do with one of the Justice Department's leading crime researchers who critiqued the effectiveness of gun control proposals, including some of President Obama's. The Justice Official Department called the memo an unfinished review of gun violence research and said it does not represent administration policy. This is how they're covering it here. But obviously it was a top official who's asked to write out a memo as basically a baseline for pushing for gun confiscation. Anyway, the NRA's run with it, and it says the memo says requiring background checks for more gun purchases could help, but also lead to more illicit weapon sales. It says banning assault weapons and high-capacity ammunition magazines produced in the future, but exempting those already owned by the public as proposed would have limited impact because people now own so many of those items. It also says that even total elimination of assault weapons would have little over effect on gun killings because assault weapons accounted for a limited proportion of those crimes. The 9-page document says the success of universal background checks would depend in part on requiring gun registration and says gun buybacks would not be effective unless massive and coupled with a ban. The administration has not proposed gun registration and so on, but gun registration ownership curbs are hot-button issues for the NRA and other gun rights groups. So they're still at it as to how to disarm the American public, which they've got to do. They've got to do it because collapses are scheduled to happen. They all happen on schedule, you understand. During the inquiries about the banks collapsing, the big banks knew, at least 5 years, and their shareholders 5 years before it happened. So it was planned to happen, to bring in austerity. They lost nothing because they got all of us to borrow money through your government to bail them out. They lost nothing. And it worked even better because then the big boys who run the world privately, they own you. They own you. You're on massive debt forever and ever. You can't pay it off with the compound interest. It's a strategy. Economic warfare is one of the main strategies of warfare. And folk don't know that's even happening. And also this one too is to do with the power. It's to show you how it's built in devaluation. You watch any of the old James Bond movies, it's quite funny to see them, because I think it was one of the movies I was rewatching recently. On Dr. No, I think. And the bad guy has this island in the Caribbean, and he's got a massive nuclear facility there to power it all and power all these weapons and so on. And it says to Bond that he bought it all for $1 million. $1 million for all of that. You couldn't buy any part of it now. You could even buy the island for $1 million. Because you see, inflation is built in to this con money system. It's built into it. It says that you'll end up like the peso. Your money ends up like the peso, or the lira. Eventually you'll pay about $10,000 for a cup of coffee. This is it has to end up this way. Everything goes up every year. Your whole life you've noticed that. Your parents noticed it. Your grandparents noticed it. Everything goes up. And you think you're going up too, because you get a pay raise every year, which doesn't cover the cost of everything going up. It's a joke. It says the purchasing power of the pound in your pocket has plunged by 2/3 over the last 30 years as the cost of everyday goods has soared. A threefold increase in retail prices means the average shopper would need to have £300, it's $2.99 here, say 300, in their wallet today to have the equivalent spending power of £100 back in 1982. Figures released by Lloyd's TSB Private Banking based on prices of essential household items show the cost of a loaf of bread has tripled in the last 3 decades from 37 pence to £1.24. A dozen eggs, which would have cost 73 pence, are now £2.82, and the price of milk has more than doubled from 20 pence to 46 pence. The cost of a pint of draft bitter went up from 73 pence to £3.18. Also shows the purchasing power of cash has eroded at an average rate of 3.7% a year over the past 30 years. It's actually higher than that. If inflation, because I've read other government articles just today, in fact, and they say themselves it goes up 10% a year. If inflation rises in line with government's targets, customers would need to have £300 in 2042 to have the equivalent spending power as £100 now. Researchers also found the average price of a detached house was now 6 times higher than in 1982, with prices soaring from £45,211 to £273,700. Fuel costs have also risen substantially, with diesel prices now 294% higher than in 1982. And it says, Nitesh Patel, economist at Lloyd's TSB Private Banking, said the value of money has fallen substantially over the past 30 years as retail prices and the cost of many everyday items has soared. It's built into it. It's built into it, folks. They always knew this. It's a con game. Con game. Everything to do with money is a racket, folks. Everything is a racket. And whistleblowers. People, again, they love to make movies about whistleblowers, but they never really do ones about the real whistleblowers. They do fictionalized ones. But the nurse in Britain who came out with the truth about Stafford Hospital is just one terrible hospital in Britain. She says, I'm still fighting to do the job she loves, she says. And it says here that she's been penalized for coming out. You always get penalized, you see. The student nurse who blew the whistle on the appalling care of elderly patients at Stafford Hospital was disciplined and is still blocked from completing her course, while staff she complained about continue to work in the National Health Service. Barbara Alat, 43 years old, reported her concerns over poor care and patient neglect to her university tutors, hospital mentors and senior nurses, but she found herself facing a fitness to practice panel at the University of Stafford School of Nursing, which threw her off her course. She has since lost 2 appeals against the decision, and 3 years later, her place remains permanently withdrawn. So that's what you get in the real world. Not like the movie versions. That's the real world, folks. It's quite nasty. Also, too, George Orwell, during in his book 1984, showed you when he's being tortured as Winston. Winston's being tortured by O'Brien. And, because Winston had clued into all the cons that were going on. And O'Brien's job was to get him to believe all the fantasy, the new realities, as he changed them daily, in fact. And he put up 5 fingers and him holding up while you're holding up, 5, and you get shocked for it. And he held up 4, and he said 3, you get shocked for that. So the thing is, Winston said, to be free. The right of freedom is the right to say 2 and 2 is 4. Understand pure reason and logic. Your right is to say what you see and you know. Right? Well, here's this article here. Students who refuse to affirm transgender classmates, people who dress as something else, right? And tell you, you've got to call them what you want them to call them. I'm really a girl, although it's still a boy, obviously. Do you understand you're being told to become insane? Huh? Do you understand this is the very system that Orwell was warning us all about? Where you can't say what is logically, sanely, factually. And you get penalized if you don't become insane and go along with it. And it's very, very important to understand what I'm saying here. Because there's no going to stop with this sort of stuff. Parents across Massachusetts are upset over new rules that would not only allow transgender students to use their restrooms of their choice, but also punish students who refuse to affirm or support their transgender classmates. Last week it says the Department of Education issued directives for handling transgender studies, including allowing them to use the bathrooms of their choice or play on sports teams that correspond to the gender with which they identify. Doesn't matter what they identify with, folks. If a guy says he's a woman and he doesn't have a womb, he's still a guy, you know. He's definitely not a woman. Back with more after this. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix. And also, I'll go to Mike from Pennsylvania who's hanging on the line there. You still there, Mike?
Yeah, hey.
Yes.
You're about in the same mood I'm today, but I figure it can only go up from here. I figure if you can't beat 'em, bark. Hell, it's almost a full moon.
That's true.
So this David Mayer de Rothschild, I guess, supposedly I heard he was, for lack of a better term, dating Cameron Diaz a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And apparently he must have got shot down like a drone because he was dating some baseball star after that. And Al Gore, meanwhile, you know, he got dumped by his fat wife.
Yeah.
Who was, I guess, busy backmasking Led Zeppelin albums some time ago, and for a hobby, I guess. Mm-hmm. A real normal person there. And he got, you know, the masseuse, I guess, you know, he couldn't get it on with the masseuse. And then at Dominique Strauss-Kahn, you know, this guy got, you know, I guess he thought, you know, because he was white, he could do anything this black chambermaid, and she had some sense in her.
Yeah.
So, you know, what I'm wondering is all this that they wrought. I mean, you saw it in the 70s, I saw it in the early 90s, and now they're probably bringing on some new form of feminism where they attack nuns. Mm-hmm. You know, Oprah, you know, men have to change, and Donahue, you got to be like a small edible fruit, like a date. Mm-hmm. And Steinem, you know, that BI.
Yes.
And these people wrought all this on, these three amigos I mentioned. And you know, now they have to, I guess, deal with the same people that they wrought.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they've always controlled the thoughts of the public forever. And the people don't think and reason through talk shows even on television. You'll find that Phil Donahue, for instance, he was the one to first start. Stop thinking about things this way. Let's look upon it from a different point of view. And within 1 hour, he could have you cheering for prostitutes. Women audiences cheering for prostitutes because he convinced them that they were doing a service for the towns they lived in. And then you look at the masses of producers and people who worked at the end. About 10 minutes the thing would go on, all the folk involved to make that 1 hour show. And psychologists and all the rest of it. They knew exactly how to turn the switches to make you believe 180 degrees around in 1 hour to where they want you to go. It's so simple. Now of course, with Oprah and all the rest of them, it's even more advanced than that. They selectively pick the audience too, who don't know they're being picked for certain traits. They have their whole personality profile written down. So the public are put one way or another so easily today. There's no difficulty at all in doing it. The general public, as I say, cannot reason for themselves. Brzezinski said that back in the 70s. They were trained that way, and now they're trained with their default positions not to think about certain things, not to use logic when they're being given emotive topics and so on, or guilt topics. Guilt's a great way of getting default positions set. And they actually feel guilty when they start questioning. Well, like the article I mentioned about, guys that will say, I'm a woman, call me Martha, and you better do it or else you're in trouble with the school. I mean, that's exactly what Orwell talks about. Freedom is the right to say 2 and 2 is 4. You're not Martha. You're a guy. You're a guy. You're still a guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that they have to now deal with the kind of society that they, they must think that they're not. They don't have to be wimps. They can't adapt very well to this.
That's right. But we're completely debauched now. The old system that kept things going is gone. Even the cultural system from the old religions have gone. And now it's chaos. It's just like ancient Greece or ancient Rome. That was, of course, the intention. Thanks for calling. From Hamish myself, from Ontario, Canada, it's good night to me. Your God or your gods go with you. Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt. This is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 26th of February 2013. Newcomers, as always, I suggest you make good use of the website cuttingthroughthematrix.com. You'll see a bunch of sites listed there. They're all the official sites I have. And you can actually download from them all. If you find sticking on one, try another one and see how it goes. A lot of folk go into the com at the same time, and sometimes you get sticking downloads. Also, all those sites listed there have transcripts for print up in English. If you go into Alan Watt Sentinel.eu, you'll find transcripts in other languages. Remember too, you bring me to you. I don't bring on guests as advertisers. This is not showbiz. And I don't sell you products outside the books and discs that I have on the website, which are mine. And I don't bring on advertisers as guests who go through the spiel of terrifying you, then offering you the solution of selling you something. I have no shares either in any other products sold and so on. So it's up to you, the listeners, to keep me going. And as I say, this is amazing too, that this particular broadcast is listened to around the world. And it's incredible how many people actually use it. And I say it's free, but most folk just take it for granted, and they think, well, it'll always be there. When you switch on it, it's like a light switch on, it's always there. And they don't understand how you even get by, because they don't think about it at all. So remember too, those who want to keep it going can help me keep going too by buying the books and the discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And to do so from the US, to remember, you can actually use a personal check to Canada from the US still. Saying it's the only country you can still do that too. And you can also use an international postal money order from the post office from the US to Canada. You can send cash or use PayPal. Across the world, you've got Western Union, MoneyGram, and PayPal once again. And straight donations are awfully, awfully, awfully welcome in these times of deepening austerity, as they like to call it, this planned austerity, this post-consumerist society we're supposed to go into now. And it's only when you read the big articles and books put out by the big boys themselves at the think tanks, you understand that everything follows in sequence to make things happen, obviously. Like the bank crash happened when they had to make it happen. That the banks lost nothing, as we all know. In fact, they furthered their agenda by getting more power over the governments and of the whole world, in fact, through it all. And every country's bailing out every other country now. It's a fantastic bank scam because the countries borrow from international private lenders in order to get these loans to bail out other countries. It's wonderful. But you are put down as the guarantors. So it's a fantastic scheme. But how else are they going to get you into austerity, the planned austerity, remember, that they talked about back in the 1970s? So you're in the century of change. This is for the time of austerity, and it's also post-consumer society, post-industrial society. In the West, it's pretty well post-technological society because it's mainly done in China, the Far East now, all the technology. So you have to be trained as we go under to behave, and they need an authoritarian society to make that happen under the guise of 9/11, anti-terrorism, and terrorists under the bed sort of stuff. Then they're using all of that to make it all happen and to get it all to obey and go along with it all. And getting used to having less and less and less. Remember, the whole idea is to increase the cost of basic living until there's no free spending cash in your pocket at the end of the month. It all goes on fees, essentials, food, fuel, and energy and so on. Because they've got more taxes to hit you with now, because you've got carbon taxes coming down your way soon too, and energy taxes. They've even talked about mandatory inspections of everyone's home. This is worldwide, remember. Agenda 21 came from the United Nations. All the countries signed on to it. And they'll do thermal testing and then massive fines if you're letting heat get out from somewhere or another. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, I'm back. We're cutting through the matrix and talking about the big system you're born into and how it really works. And few people know they're living through agendas. The United Nations, and when they signed all their names onto it, that's all your leaders signed their names onto it in 1946. They were signing away your countries, really, basically, and sovereignty too, because they came to the conclusion, and this was really what the war was about, was to end nation states altogether. And under the guise of doing that, they would flood countries with multiculturalism, which really wouldn't keep cultures. For a while it would, but they'd all fight each other and eventually come into some new mush that hasn't been invented yet. This is basically the theory of it all. And then there'd be no more world wars. And again, it was a ruse as well to get all that to happen, and many much more to happen too. As I say, if you go through the masses of literature from the United Nations, it's all in your face where they want to take you. And they know too that during all this kind of thing, you'll also get massive problems in schools and ethnic communities. Britain's had their shares of it over years as they bring in lots of people from really opposing cultures. And that's the intention too, not similar cultures. The Europeans were to be kept out really of immigrating to each other's countries and even to the old British Empire countries as well. But you find this sort of article is getting pretty common now, even in the States now. It says, school officials in Minneapolis have beefed up police protection and expect weeks of investigation in the wake of an all-out brawl between students at South High School in the Minnesota metropolis on February 14th. And it says that Rachel Hicks, speaking for the school district, said additional school resource officers who are trained to interact with students are now on duty. And it was a racial thing and an ethnic thing at the same time, apparently. And it said that in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune reported it was a racially tinged melee between 200 and 300 students shoved, kicked, and threw bottles at one another. At least 3 students and school staff members were taken by Amnesty Hospital for medical treatment. In the case of students at the school said that the fight broke out after tensions between Somali Americans and other students flared up. And it says that Somalis are largely Muslim, clashing with students of various other ethnic and religious backgrounds, including American Indians and Black Americans. A student was quoted by local media as saying the riot was a racial issue and it was the most significant of this year. Now, this is the sort of thing that gets more common as this big agenda is moved into place, and we have to live through it. But unfortunately, it can go any way it wants. Really, these kind of conflicts, it depends on how the big boys at the top handle all the propaganda and how they manage this kind of story. But you find out how far it gets eventually in places like Britain. And Britain, remember, was to be completely destroyed, according to Tony Blair's right-hand man. And I've read the articles from the mainstream where they basically said they were bringing all the multiculturalism to destroy what was left of British culture forever, so it couldn't rise again. And there's been massive campaigns through Hollywood and so on about really the target group. And here's a victim of the target group. It says, boy 9 in England is found hanged. He was 9 years old. He was being bullied for being white. It says Aaron Dugmore, 9, found hanged at Birmingham home by his mother, believed to be Britain's second youngest suicide caused by bullying. The schoolboy was rushed to hospital but died of suspected cardiac arrest. The family claims Aaron was being tormented by bullies at his new school, and the police are investigating the circumstances surrounding Aaron's death. And it says, they say Aaron was threatened with a plastic knife by one Asian pupil who warned him next time it will be a real one. He was also allegedly told by another pupil that all the white people should be dead, and he was forced to hide from the bullies in the playground at lunchtime. Aaron's mother, Kelly Marie Dugmore, 13 stepfather Paul Jones, said that despite complaints to the school, nothing was done to stop the bullying. And it says, Aaron had recently started in year 5 at the Erdington Hall Primary School in Birmingham, a school where 75% of pupils come from ethnic minority backgrounds. So that's fairly typical now, and expect more and more of this to come down the roads. And this was all intentional. The big boys who planned all this knew it would come to this phase. And remember, they've had riots before in Britain too, and places even the cities were burned down over the riots back in the 70s, late 70s. So everything's going the way it's supposed to go. And out of it all comes more and more bureaucracies, more government control, more indoctrination into the teachers who indoctrinate the students and so on. And that's just the way it's planned to go. Also, in Britain too, it's quite interesting. It's a non-event really, this little article, but at the same time too, it shows you how people think. People think that there's a justice in the world if they get a chance to go into court. And remember John Hill, the guy who was charged for putting out the ripple effect video, questioning the whole series of bombings in England, in London. And then they put him up for treason initially, tried to try him for that and put him away forever. But he did think he would get his day in court where he could say that the whole story was full of holes, which it was. And he did inspire many other people to look into it too, to find out that these bombers were supposedly on a train in the morning that wasn't even running that day. They knew that in the court too. They were on that train, but it wasn't running. I mean, there's your double speak for you right there, you know. But anyway, he thought he'd have his day in court, but of course they didn't give you a chance to say anything at all. This one here is about the BBC, and it says, historic court hearings, BBC in the dock for manipulating evidence and providing biased coverage of the September 11th, 2001 attacks. And it says, what at stake is the BBC's coverage of the attacks? On February 25th, in the small town of Horsham in the UK, there'll be a rare and potentially groundbreaking opportunity for the 9/11 truth movement. 3 hours of detailed 9/11 evidence is to be presented and considered in a court of law where the British Broadcasting Corporation will be challenged over the inaccurate and biased manner in which they portrayed the events and evidence of 9/11. It says, over the last 16 months, the BBC has been challenged strongly by individuals in the UK over 2 documentaries that they showed in September 2011 as part of the 10th anniversary of 9/11, namely 9/11 Conspiracy Road Trip and the Conspiracy Files, 9/11 10 years on. Formal complaints were lodged with the BBC over the inaccuracy and bias of these documentaries, which according to 9/11 activists was in breach of the operating requirements of BBC through their Royal Charter and agreement with the British public. Well, the British public never signed it, mind you, but technically they do when they pay up their fees every year, the license to watch the damn trash that they put out there. It says, the document requires BBC to show information that's both accurate and impartial. These complaints were supported by the US-based educational charity Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, which submitted detailed scientific evidence to the BBC to buttress the complaints. The evidence focuses in particular on the confirmed free fall of the World Trade Center number 7 tower. Remember, 7 tower came down later. And this video is up there where they talk about we'll have a controlled demolition. And it says in the NIST's 2008 admission of this fact, in addition, over 300 9/11 Truth petitioners, signers, supported these complaints by sending letters to the BBC requesting that they show this evidence to the public. Not a single mainstream media has acknowledged the court case. And it's highly unlikely that the proceeding will be the object of unbiased coverage. And I've got 2 articles on this, but it does mention that one guy's getting taken to court. He's going to court because he's not going to pay his license until, otherwise, actually quoted the Terrorism Act. He said he would be supporting the Terrorism Act if he gave money to the BBC. When it's giving you all this false evidence. And that's where he's standing. But whether they go with it, I don't know, because you never get to say what's right and what's wrong. In fact, I think the judge already said, basically the facts don't matter. How many times have you heard that the facts don't matter? The facts are you going to pay your license or not? And are you still watching the BBC? And he'll get fined for that. And the judge won't ask what his complaint is all about. So you don't get your day in court. The justice system has nothing to do with right and wrong. And I hope you understand that. Never has been. It's all technical points. And legalities, and points of legalities, and stuff like that. And it's not an inquiry where you can say what you want. It's a court case. So the poor guy will get fines. It'd be good luck to him for at least standing up and doing something. Now, also, on program tonight too, this is the granting of the Best Picture Oscar to the Iranophobic movie Argo has long been foreseeable as a Machiavellian maneuvering of Hollywood propaganda, and that it harbors a much more elaborate imperialistic scheme, political analysts say. And it says, I put my money on this film to win the Best Picture Oscar, even though there's nothing remotely best about it, especially if Obama can pull off winning the presidential election, wrote cultural critic Noam Nicolini in an article published at Counterpunch website October 2012. Argo, above all else, is a piece of conservative liberal propaganda created by Hollywood to support the Obama administration's conservative liberal policies. Actually, it's neocons. As we move towards the presidential election, she said, before Obama was re-elected for the second term. It also primes the war wheels for an American-supported Israeli attack on Iran so that the leftists can feel okay about the war when they cast their vote for Obama in 2012, the critic pointed out. Then at the 85th edition of the Academy Awards at the Dolby Theatre, Hollywood, California on Sunday, Michelle Obama, the U.S. First Lady, announced Argo as a winner of the Best Picture Oscar live from the White House. The thriller, directed by U.S. filmmaker Ben Affleck, is loosely based indeed, on the allegedly historical account by former CIA Tony Mendez about the rescue of 6 American diplomats during the takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran after Iran's 1979 Islamic Revolution. The revolutionary Iranian university students who took over the U.S. Embassy believed that the embassy had turned into a den of espionage which aimed to overthrow the nascent Islamic Republic establishment. Argo only tells the rescue operation of the 6 Americans from the Canadian embassy in Iran, with no mentioning of the 53 Americans who spent 444 days in the U.S. embassy. Nicolini lashed out at Argo for completely neglecting to provide the Iranian side of the story, noting the film is a sanitized version of the events. She argued that there's nothing authentic about the film's manipulation of historical events and described the movie as pure political propaganda. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, talking about the movie Argo, and it says the former Canadian ambassador to Iran, Ken Taylor, was heavily criticized the movie, saying the amusing side is a scriptwriter, Chris Terrio, in Hollywood had no idea what he's talking about. He said Argo downplays the actual extent of the Canadian involvement, which was considerable, and he criticized it for incorporating a myriad of creative liberties, including the black and white portrayal of Iranian people and fabricated scenes, adding that Argo characterizes people in a way that isn't quite right. The former Canadian envoy argued that Argo didn't portray a more conventional side and a more hospitable side of the Iranian society, as well as an intent that they were looking for some degree of justice. Political analysts say Argo unmasks an elaborate U.S. scheme to employ every medium in its propaganda apparatus to incite Iranophobia across the globe. And Argo is an errant instance of Hollywoodism. In point of fact, it's yet another attempt to foment Iranophobia, not only in the U.S. but across the world as well, said the Iranian academic Dr. Ismail Salami in an article on Press TV, he says. This is in recent years, Islam has become to encompass a wider scope of media, including cinema, which is incontestably capable of exercising a more powerful effect on manipulating the audience, he said. And it's so true. When you see things with emotion in it and so on, they can make you believe anything. The analyst also lashed out at Argo's director for portraying a stereotyped and caricatured view of the Iranian society, and noted that Affleck has consciously sought to ridicule the very customs and traditions of Iran. Well, it's nothing new, as I say, in what Hollywood puts out to do with any of the countries across there. As we know, it's part of the military-industrial complex. Also, too, they want to put aspartame in milk without a label. I'll put that link up tonight, too. And it says big dairy, that's the big corporate farms now that run the world, are pushing the FDA for approvals, which they'll get, in other words, too. I have no doubt about it. This is the 2 powerful dairy organizations, International Dairy Food Association and the National Milk Producers Federation, are petitioning the Food and Drug Administration to allow aspartame and other artificial sweeteners to be added to milk and other dairy products without a label. So, everything's going down the tube, isn't it? Or is it? It's going the way it's supposed to go, I suppose. Also on tonight too, let's put up a petition to be presented to the Canadian House of Commons regarding high altitude aerial spraying, which is of course chemtrails, as it's called. I'll put this up tonight, this link, for those who want to sign it and see what they say, what comes out of it. Because it's supposed to answer these things if there's so many thousands of signatures on it. But we'll see, because it's under the Official Secrets Act, so I doubt if they'll come out and say anything at all. And as is collapsing consensus, another German meteorology site wonders about the global temperature stagnation. Last week, German meteorologist Dominic Young openly wondered what was happening to all the warming, pointing out that Germany was suffering from its 5th consecutive colder than normal winter, which is a record. By the way, it's another one I'll put up tonight too. And the US broke over 500 records this winter alone and across the whole of the US in different places for low temperatures. But it says, last month, German meteorologist Dr. Carlson Brandt, again, said global warming, he dismissed the whole catastrophic events that they keep pushing as nonsense. And just days ago, another German meteorologist site questioned global warming in a piece titled Global Warming Stagnates, guessing the causes. It says, since 1998, the global mean temperature has not risen significantly, while the global temperature rose about 0.5 degrees centigrade from the 1970s till the end of the 1990s. It stagnated for the last 15 years, though at a high level, he says, the stagnation surprised a lot of experts who are now searching for possible causes for this development. Well, how about the aerial spraying? I mean, see, they're controlling the whole weather now. It's controlled. It has been. It's interesting, 1998 is when they really started it in earnest on a daily basis, just spraying the skies above you. And also the climate challenge and the failure of democracy. Interesting, there's a book that's come out. Now I can't connect these guys to the Club of Rome, but what they're pushing here is all of the stuff that came out of the Club of Rome. Remember the Club of Rome were given the task by the United Nations of coming up with something to pull the world together. We'd all unite in the world together and go into an authoritarian type society to save ourselves. And they were the guys who said that eventually they picked on global warming, famine, drought, hunger, and so on. That would fit the bill. And that's their own words for it too. That would fit the bill. So these guys are very, very similar. They must be connected with it in some ways. It's a climate change challenge and the failure of democracy. Now, the Club of Rome also said democracy wouldn't work. And to get the big agendas through, it was too cumbersome, too many conflicting parties all fighting each other. And they have to go into an authoritarian society. So here you have it again with a book come out, Climate Change Challenge and the Failure of Democracy by David Shearman and Joseph Wayne Smith. And it says here, in the latest volume of the Politics and Environment series, Professor Emeritus of Medicine David Shearman and philosopher and ecologist Joseph Wayne Smith show a complete willingness to challenge organizational identities. They firstly argue that our system of overall political, economic and social governance is an obstacle to confronting effectively the looming environmental crisis that global climate change poses. Shearman Smith challenged us to re-examine how states, corporations and consumers are driving us literally to the brink of disaster and engaging considerations of the limits to growth. Now, the limits to growth is also a book they put out too by the Club of Rome. So I'm sure they've got something to do with it, or actually they're members of the Club of Rome. Limits to growth. It says the separation of corporatism and governance, financial reform, legal reform, and the reclaiming of the commons for human society. They ask us to consider what's often considered unthinkable in our cosmological ideology. In other words, democracy. Reconsider what democracy is, and do we need it? Back with more after this break.
You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, talking about a book that's out called The Climate Change Challenge and the Failure of Democracy. I'm certain it's Club of Rome because they're using all the terminology that they normally spout. But it says, in short, Sherman and Smith argue that liberal democracy, considered sacrosanct in modern societies, is an impediment to finding ecologically sustainable solutions for the planet. Many, of course, will find this argument untenable, but I would urge readers to listen closely to Shearman Smith's entertaining and always thoughtful arguments, as they spin your mind, of course. In an area of ever-widening, ever-deepening globalization, liberal democracies have proven unable or unwilling to check the explosive growth of corporatism's power, influence, and reach. In terms that mirror Marx's thoughts on the aggregation of capital into the hands of the fewer and fewer, Shearman and Smith are nonetheless not neo-Marxists. Well, they're not. They're Trotskyists. This is not the con that they pull. They're Trotskyists. In some ways, their notions that liberal democracy must give way to a form of authoritarian government by experts, that's exactly what's always been the agenda, reminds us as well of Plato's Republic that I've mentioned so often as well. So, you know where it's coming from. And this article was put up by the Pell Center for International Relations and Public Policy. Sounds very official, again, private organization, as they all are. But this is where they're going with everything, to terrify the public under anything excuse. Save us all, save the planet. Aliens aren't good enough anymore. We've seen too many science fictions. It had the opposite effect until we laugh at them. So now they're using global warming and all that kind of stuff, even though we're freezing our butts off. And it says here, rich get richer with the IRS loophole in sunny Bermuda. Billionaire hedge fund moguls are getting comfortable with the US tax loophole to fatten their already plump bottom lines. All it takes to avoid tens of millions of dollars in taxes is a short trip to Bermuda, not by them, but by their cash. This is hedges like John Paulson and Steve Cohen are forming reinsurance companies in tax-free havens like Bermuda or the Cayman Islands, and then transferring cash from their funds to the reinsurance companies. The cash classified as insurance company reserves is then transferred back into the funds as reserves to be invested for future claims. Thanks to an IRS loophole, profits from these insurance companies are not taxed until the stake in the fund is sold, and that could be years down the line. And it says that, and here's the kicker, the taxes when paid are at the lower capital gains rate and not as ordinary income. And it tells you how Bermuda's reinsurance cash can pay off $100 million of regular cash invested in a fund, returning 15% annually, and tax at the top rate will result in a $50 million profit after taxes. But the Bermuda cash will produce a profit of $77 million. Paulson, for example, shipped $450 million last year into a Bermuda company called Packer Limited, which is own brass plate reinsurance company, according to Bloomberg, which reported on the growing trend yesterday. Packer Limited is basically an office mail drop without employees. It's all legal, folks. These folk at the top run the legal system too. Packer Limited is basically an office-made mail drop without employees. Within months, the cash was recycled out of Bermuda and back into Paulson's hedge funds in New York, tax-free, to make him even richer without any tax bills for years into the future. These types of reinsurance companies are permitting U.S. taxpayers to defer, and definitely U.S. tax lawyer David S. Miller, a tax expert called Walder and Wickersham and Taft, told Bloomberg. He branded the move as an unjustified benefit. Washington has been promising for a decade to shut the loophole, this particular one, but it hasn't got round to it. There's too many things on the go. More and more hedge fund billionaires are relying on tax haven reinsurance mail drops to legally avoid taxes, including Third Point's Daniel Loeb and Greenlight Capital Inc.'s David Einhorn, it was reported. The companies set up by Paulson, Cohen and Loeb are located within a half mile of each other in the narrow streets ringing Bermuda capital Hamilton, according to Bloomberg. Loeb's Third Point Reinsurance holds about $785 million in funds, including $75 million of Loeb's own money, the report said. Cohen's offshore reinsurer, SAC Re, holds about $500 million, including $125 million of Cohen's cash. Bermuda's quaint pastoral buildings in a small commercial strip along the Hamilton's harbour are fixed with scores of brass plates of reinsurance companies from around the world. And generations of investors have used reinsurance as an investment and tax avoidance tool, but a decade ago the IRS vowed to clamp down on its abuses with little today to show and no prosecutions. So they haven't changed anything at all. Bloomberg said at least 3 new reinsurers backed by U.S. hedge funds managers put a combined $1.7 billion back into the managers' hands in the U.S. So it's one set for the rich, and the ones who pay it all are the guys at the general population, of course, for everything. Also, too, everybody knows about if they still remember, of course, because we've got short memories now, is the Savile scandal in Britain with these years and years of paedophilia. and all the carry on at the BBC where he worked. They all knew about it and so on. And lots of the other ones were involved in it too. But it says so much for BBC transparency. 90 pages of BBC's Savile report, which was supposed to report on by the BBC, were blacked out. It says DG goes to ground and no one is blamed for the fiasco. So 3,000 pages of emails, interviews and submissions released online at 11 a.m. And it says here that the BBC faced ridicule last night for publishing an open dossier into the Jimmy Savile scandal. It was covered in Censors Inc. The corporation has repeatedly promised to be open and transparent about the material which formed the basis of last year's Pollard inquiry into the Savile crisis. But there were accusations of a cover-up after large swaths of staff testimonies about the saga were blacked out. Despite the redactions, which covered around 90 pages, stinging criticism remained, including Jeremy Paxman's fury at the contemptible way the BBC handled the affair. He said it was pathetic. Newsnight had not tackled the Savile issue sooner, and said it was common gossip about the corporation that the DJ liked young girls, and occasionally boys too. But Paxman's strongest criticisms of his bosses, including the then Director of News Helen Boden, appear to be amongst hundreds of lines of evidence censored by the BBC. And that was another pal, I think Helen Boden was a great pal of Savile's. I've got some photographs of her with him. Last night, the BBC's claims to be accountable descended into farce as acting Director General Tim Davie refused to be interviewed by anyone except his own journalists. Channel 4 News editor Ben DePere said the only time he had come across a comparable situation was when he tried to interview despots such as Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe or President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad of Iran and President Charles Taylor of Liberia. She also added to it the directors of the movie Argo. Paxman himself is among several journalists who are said to be furious about the censorship of their testimonies. Bill, nothing happens about being furious and all that kind of stuff. Nothing. It's just it's all getting whitewashed. They have to whitewash it. There's too many important people involved in the same paedophilia rings as Savile. In fact, MI5 have lots of dossiers where they were using them for blackmail purposes if they ever needed them on some of the guys. Also, too, this article is about Blackwater, because now you live in this public-private partnership deals now, and even the privatized militaries and all that kind of stuff. It says, contractors of the U.S. private security firm Blackwater secured the site of a roadside bomb attack and so on. All the PR photographs are at the beginning of this particular article. It says, European states are subcontracting an increasing number of tasks to private military companies to cut their army sizes and budgets, which is nonsense because they're more expensive than the regular army. These mainly U.S. firms cost them dearly, however, says the military expert Alexander Vutravers. Since the 1990s, the U.S. armed forces, and particularly also the armies of Europe, have been using private military firms to handle tasks they can no longer fulfill. This is Alexander Vutravers, head of the Department of International Relations at Webster University in Geneva, and chief editor of Revue Militaire Suisse, explains why, of Revue Militaire Suisse. So he says private military companies primarily work in niche markets, in activities which conventional armed forces cannot or do not want to carry out. Armies with annual budgets are not necessarily profitable, according to defense representatives. They prefer to entrust a whole number of maintenance and logistic tasks to those companies. During the war in Iraq, for example, the U.S. Army signed extremely lucrative contracts for laundry, hygiene and cleaning. I don't know if you ever saw the movie that they put out on Halliburton, where the U.S. Treasury actually, they printed up millions and millions of dollars. You see it getting flown in, taking off the plane over in Iraq, and handed to the Halliburton Corporation. They started buying brand new stretch limos and all the rest of it, just like crazy, you wouldn't believe it. Plus the filtration systems for the troops weren't even working properly. All the troops were getting poisoned and contaminated with contaminated water. What an incredible farce that was. All that money just disappeared. Anyway, says these companies also win a lot of contracts to protect people in buildings, an area where the government of trained and heavily equipped professional military staff is not always justified. And finally, they fill the gaps by providing qualified personnel, such as helicopter pilots and so on. And says, but the pilots don't often stay for a long time because the salaries are much more lucrative in private industry. So they go into private industry. So it's just mercenary work. And this whole article is about it. It's not cheaper though. It's more expensive. And also Moody's strips Britain of a top-notch rating. You see how the whole con of money works and the guys who run it all. I mean, it's not bad enough they already have you in massive debt in every country because somehow along the line all these democracies supposedly started borrowing money from private bankers rather than printing their own and create their own cash. And number one, too, no one ever asked, why does a country have to borrow money from outside anything anyway? Look at the cash they already rake in. You see, the whole banking system's a fraud. A very intelligent fraud. Been running for years. And anybody who tries to stop it, well, they won't last long at all. They'll be dead before you know it. There's no way about it. There's no way. If you want to get gangsterism, go into the cash system. And who runs the world? So they get Britain and all other countries to start bailing out other countries by borrowing money to give to these other countries to bail them out. This circle that they put them into. So every country's borrowing money and getting deeper into debt to bail out other countries that are already in debt. And so now they all end up in debt. Isn't that fantastic? And then the guys who lend you money get these guys like Moody's to rate you for debt rating. And then they downgrade you, which means you pay a higher interest on your future borrowing. It's beautiful. What a scam, eh? What a beautiful scam. Oh, it really is, isn't it? It's like keeping getting up and you get slapped in the face until you're down again. And you get up again and get slapped. And we're supposed to believe this is an honest system we're living in. What a joke. What a joke. All the big boys, including these rating companies, work together, folks. They all know each other awfully well. A lot of them are married with each other. So I'll put this up tonight too at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And this article too, again is Blackwater. It says, Raleigh, North Carolina, it says the federal prosecution of 5 former employees of the private security firm Blackwater has crumbled after the defendants said they were acting at the behest of, guess who? The CIA. By providing 5 guns as gifts to King Abdullah II of Jordan. This is what it was about. It says federal prosecutors indicate former Blackwater President Gary Jackson and 4 others in 2010, a long list of felony firearms violations involving dozens of weapons, including 17 M4 military assault rifles and 17 Romanian-made AK-47s. All charges against 3 of the accused were dismissed Thursday at the request of prosecutors after a federal judge ruled earlier this month to reduce several of the felony charges to misdemeanors. Can you imagine getting off with a misdemeanor for that in your own country, never mind abroad? Under a plea agreement, Jackson and former company vice president William Matthews admitted guilt Thursday on misdemeanor charges related to record-keeping violations, resulting in $5,000 fines and 4 months house arrest. They'd originally faced decades of prison on 12 felony charges each. That's what happens. Strings are pulled and that's what you get, you know. That's how it really works, isn't it? And British members of parliament, because they really are, you understand the psychopathic personality that goes into politics in the first place. And they are sussed out by psychopaths. When you get your resume started to get into politics, you have to go into local government. Before you get into local government, you go into charity work, where you join certain charities to get your face in there. And there's always some elderly fella there, sitting there, that does a lot of golfing. This is how it works, I'm not kidding you. And he's a guy who will eventually pick people, the right people, to get bumped up the ladder. He's got the word into local councils, then from local councils into your local political party, etc. That's how you get into it. And they all come in with their briefcases and stuff, and they all work generally in other jobs. They come in their briefcases and they have their 1-hour session once a week or something, and eat, you know, lots of cakes and have coffee, and say very little about the charity they're involved in. The whole point is you're being sussed out by the fat guy at the end of the table who does a lot of golfing. You see? Because he's looking for this. Psychopaths recognize each other, you understand. They immediately. And that's the kind they want into politics. That's why they're always involved in scandals and all the rest of it. They don't follow the norms or the cultural norms of society and their sexual things or anything like that either. This is members of parliament in Britain, and computers are used to access porn sites, including foot fat fetishism, and more than 2,500 times supposedly on one site. And so they're being used to view hardcore pornography featuring sadomasochism and the foot and fat fetishism. The X-rated websites have been accessed more than 2,500 times with computers used by the members of parliament, peers, and their staff. Gay cruising websites have also been visited a further 3,500 times, along with obscure erotica sites, including one showing naked women posing with cats. Asked for an explanation, the parliamentary spokesman claimed the sites may have been visited accidentally. This is your government. And that's our PR spokesman. This is your government, folks. And they lie about this, they lie about everything, you see. Accidentally. It says the Daily Mail on Sunday obtained that information through a Freedom of Information inquiry covers a 14-month period between May 2011 and July 2012. The visits are a breach of parliamentary IT rules which bar online pornography, nudity and adult mature content. It follows a revelation in newspapers earlier this month that parliamentary computers were used to click thousands of times on a website that encourages adulterous affairs. And this, you couldn't make this stuff up. Harry Potter, right, a barrister, a lawyer, Harry Potter, specializing in obscenities cases, says, having viewed the material, it does not, in my opinion, fall foul of the law as constitutes extreme pornography. Well, what's his opinion? What would he call extreme pornography, Mr. Harry Potter? Eh? It is, however, undoubtedly hardcore pornography, the variety of the foot fetish websites, which includes pornographic images of lurid sex acts involving feet. What can you do? I shouldn't ask that question. Have been viewed 470 times. Another website featuring an array of pictures of naked women lying next to cats, viewed 17 times. A Polish pornography website was accessed 292 times on May 2011. It's probably the same guy, I bet you. In the same month, a dating website was clicked on 653 times. The website boasts is dedicated to connecting fun-loving singles across the UK. So anyway, that's your government for you, and there's nothing new in that at all. At all. Now, the Bank of England Deputy Governor Paul Tucker has said that negative interest rates should be considered. As well, say, oh yeah, we know all about that, right? Well, I'll go into negative interest rates when I come back from this break. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix and talking about negative interest rates. Now, what it is basically is giving you less interest on any savings you put in, so it's going to affect the savers. And this guy actually says it. He says, any discussion of negative rates would have to be taken into account the likely detrimental impact on savers who've already seen the income from their savings fall since the financial crisis. What they want to get down to is to give you no interest on any savings at all. Which is, again, this is a great boon at the bank as well. Because they invest that cash as soon as you put it in there, and they get 20, 30, 40, depends on their Moody's ratings, you see. They get back from their loans. They make a killing on it. So here they go with another killing of dropping the interest given back to people who are saving. So that's what really it's about. This is what they want to do, you see. Get more profit for themselves. To save us all, you understand. It's always the same thing to save us, isn't it? And in China too, they're back to trafficking kidneys from the poor folk in China. A place is raking in trillions every week, for God's sake, all the sales across the planet. And the folk at the bottom are just the same as ever. Actually, it's a perfect form of feudalism, isn't it, really? It's still a communist call it a communist government, just a bunch of guys at the top, interrelated families that run the whole country in a feudal system with perfect slaves at the bottom. So the folk at the bottom are just as poor as ever, so they're selling off their body parts while they're still alive. Quite sad, isn't it? As I say too, it says in this article, over 650 snow records set in the USA this week. Another wonky surface station is located. I'll put this up tonight as well for anybody that cares about the ongoing nonsense about global warming. And Mr. Holland of France, the Prime Minister, he's been given the Peace Prize after he set the bombers loose, of course, in Mali. I'll put that one up too. That's what you need to do to get the Peace Prize, is to go and kill folk. They'll get it. They'll get their chance at it. Depends how many folk you kill, or actually who you kill as well. It depends if it's the favourite folk that you're killing, you see. And this one too, this is very interesting. It's a former senior Scotland Yard officer, that's the British top cops here, has warned that corruption may fail to be exposed under the new plans to regulate the police and the media. See, all the media now is to be regulated, just like Australia did it too. And in Britain, they got Leveson Lord Justice Leveson to put his bunch of stuff through. So as to supposedly stop whistleblowers from speaking to the press and harm the public interest. Today, Mr. Hurley said, how did the press find out about the Members of Parliament's expense scandal? How did we find out about patient care deals and others between the HMRC and major corporate failures? The media find out about them very often because people come forward and tell them about it. But he's saying that with these new laws are coming out, he says, my concern is we're creating a culture across the whole public sector where people will be afraid to talk to the media about what's going on. Well, of course, that's the intention of it. You're not living in any democracy. You're living under the facade of it, but even that's to be trained out of you eventually, until everybody gets the message without actually being told explicitly. A lot of folk already accept it, actually. If you ask most youngsters about things, they just give you a blank stare, They don't care about privacy or anything else. It's just relevance to them. So, as I say, we're all going under the microscope to see what we say. And all the rest of it is a censor. Even the mainstream, not that many in the mainstream ever say much of any import to the public, but it's really to go after all the rest of us. You see, they're not authorized to be out there opening your mouths. From Hamish myself from Ontario, Canada, it's good night to me, your God, or your gods go with you. Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 27th of February 2013. I always tell newcomers at the beginning of the broadcast, rather than pester you all the way through it, that you should make good use of the website cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Lots of audios for download for free. And you can start to understand the system you're born into and how it's arranged. How it was arranged a long time ago, in fact, by very powerful people forming their foundations and their clubs. With the intent of running the world properly. That is, properly. That means efficiently. That means all of you, the way that you live and everything else. And they would also take over the resources, or the natural resources of the world. Everything you need to live on and it's happening as you live today. You see monopolies over water, gas, energy, oil, all the rest of it, even food too. So that's a big agenda. Plus, of course, they've got academia on board with them at the top. And academia is pushing for massive changes. This is the century of change, they call it, the 21st century. That's what they call it in academia. That's when the whole agenda has been on the go for well over 100 years, comes to be fulfilled in your lifetime. So we're going through the big changes. Remember too, you're the audience that bring me to you. I don't bring on advertisers as guests. I don't have shares in any products that are sold. All I have is the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com website to keep me ticking over. Or fluttering. Sometimes it's sinking as well. So it's up to you, the listeners, to keep me going by buying them and donating as well, if possible. And from the US to Canada, remember, you can still use personal checks and international postal money orders from the post office. You can send cash or use PayPal across the world. Western Union, MoneyGram, and PayPal once again. And again, straight donations are really seriously welcome as we go through inflation, of course, and devaluation of currencies across the planet. As I say, if you really understand the system that you're in, it's quite blatant, really. It's in your face today. It's just that the media doesn't play it up that way. They play it down, in fact, or they misdirect you into some other thing that's happening. But this is the whole agenda. The world is being guided through all the crashes, and the austerity program has to be brought in somehow, and that's why they brought the banks down at that time. The banks all colluded in this. They lost nothing. They gained a lot, actually, but they lost nothing. And devaluation of currencies. And, of course, you're being forced into austerity. As the big boys who wanted to take over all the resources in the world said a long time ago, over 100 years, eventually all your spending money, your free spending money, would go to pay fees and licenses, fuel, energy, and so on, all the vital things that you need, food and water, that kind of thing. And that's really what the agenda is supposed to be. They're fed up with you wasting all their resources, you see. Apparently they claimed it a long time ago. And that's what you're going through today. And if you look at the United Nations and all of its multitudes of organizations working on every single facet of humanity and society, it's staggering. You need more than 100 staff just working full time, trying to keep up with what they churn out there. And another 100 just to check into the thousands of organizations that belong to them. Full-time jobs. You can't do it all yourself. or retain it in your memory. In fact, there's just too many. And that's how they've done it all, by this massive parallel government that they have of non-governmental organizations. They're paid constantly to lobby, big money to lobby governments. The governments are all picked again by the big foundations that fund the NGOs, so they're willing to listen to them and push through agendas on behalf of the public, you see. And that's what the NGOs pretend to represent. You don't vote in the NGOs. You don't vote in their paymasters of the big privately owned foundations, unelected again. You don't vote in the United Nations. You run privately, and that's the big kicker to all of this. Folk haven't really woken up to this fact that you're run by private organizations, and you always have been. Back with more after these messages. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix and talking about the big agenda. And it really is everything. And I've mentioned for many, many years that any system you could imagine that you could start up to fight it or replace it with generally is already in existence. It's started up by the opposition. They give you your oppositions to all the main things that are happening. They're already tailor-made for you to jump into, to give you heroes all through your life to follow and lead up the garden path. They've always done this. Look at all the well-meaning folk who were brainwashed again into the greening movement and followed all the Greenpeace and all the rest of it, only to find out as part of the big establishment just going to force us all into austerity, vegetarianism down the road, and really we're just headed for extinction. And so they always give you your leaders, be very, very careful. Now, in the 70s and the 80s, 1980s, had the corporate raiders. And the corporate raiders, of course, were private guys who noticed that some big corporations, which are generally family-owned, the old ones, the families didn't own the dominant shares, and they ran the companies and the factories and so on, really not in the most profitable way, because they kept older people on in the job and so on, didn't fire them, etc., because they knew that their responsibility, that was the old way of doing business. So your responsibility to your employees. And the corporate raiders came in and bought out the dominant shares and then kicked out all the old guys, sold off a lot of their stuff, and then so-called streamlined, it was the term that they used, streamlined the business, and then they sell them off immediately. Most of them flopped because they sold out a lot of the essential things that they needed to run the business. Doesn't matter. This goes on and on and on. And understand, it's really weird, isn't it? We're all living under something called money that a few people control privately at the top. We don't elect them either, and often you don't even know who they are. And we think we live in a free society. And these companies and corporations often, they get bailed out with your tax money when they make their private business mistakes. So, it's not mistakes actually, they're too big to fail, as they say. They can't get prosecuted. They can't go down the tubes if you close them down. That's what they claimed, in a way. And personally, I think we should be like Iceland and let them all fold. And then charge them all. Charge them all. But it doesn't happen that way, because money rules the world, and the guys who rule the money rule the world. And this article shows you they're now moving in to raid retirement accounts, and it says, the feds want your retirement accounts, and quietly behind the scenes, the groundwork is being laid for federal government confiscation of tax-deferred retirement accounts such as IRAs. Slowly, the cat's been let out of the bag. This is last January 18th, in a little-nosed interview with Richard Cordray, acting head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Bloomberg reported that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is weighing whether it should take on a role in helping Americans. I hate that word. You always should cringe when you hear they want to help you. Manage the $19.4 trillion they put into retirement savings, a move that would be the agency's first foray into consumer investments. That thought generates some skepticism, it says here. And it says that days later, on January 24th, President Obama re-nominated Cordray as a CFPB director, even though his recess appointment was not due to expire until the end of 2013. One day later, in the first significant resistance to President Obama's concentration of presidential power, a 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. unanimously said that Obama's recess appointments to the National Labor Relations Board are unconstitutional. Similar litigation testing the Cordray appointments to the CFPB is in the pipeline. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is created by the 2,319-page Dodd-Frank legislation is a new and little-known bureau with wide-ranging powers. Placed within the Federal Reserve, a corporation privately owned by member banks, the CFPB is insulated from oversight by either the President or Congress. As budget not subject to legislative control, it's not even clear that a new president can replace the CFPB director on taking office. Unusual legal and political environments have a significant impact on the CFPB. With Cordray's recess appointment in doubt, several questions remain unanswered. What will become of the CFPB when Cordray's appointment is found invalid? An indicator comes from the NRLB, which operated unconstitutionally for years without a quorum. It says, in 2007, the Senate threatened no NLRB nominations reported out of committee. And it goes on and on, this article. I'll put the whole thing up tonight. But it's interesting because, in other words, it's like the corporate raiders. So they're eyeing their IRAs and they want to grab the money and start doing their own investments. And of course, taking the lion's share of all the interest as they lend out to other countries that are stagnating and exorbitant interest too. But of course, the IRAs will stay the same. You won't get anything out of that. And if they fold, of course, your IRAs go with it. So everything's happening the way it's supposed to go because we're living in an incredible time of open, almost legal, you can call it legal corruption, because the boys who own the banks gave you your legal system too, and they're not going to prosecute themselves. Another thing too is to do with Africa. Africa, has had so much money pumped into it over centuries actually. And yeah, the big boys and that from other countries that are in there, looted the gold and the silver, the uranium, everything they can get a hold of. Still doing it, of course, and that's what AFRICOM's going to be doing shortly. That's what they're really setting up big time for, as the U.S. Army moves into across Africa. But the thing is, too, Africa's always been run like some other countries. You can understand that there's no such thing in the human gene as a thing called democracy. It's someone's idea, you understand. Sometimes it's a front for something else. Most often it is, actually. But it's not an innate thing in the human gene to have this thing called democracy, as you know it, that is. The closest you get to democracy, natural democracy, is, say, American Indians or people who've vanished, in fact, from the past, like old Scottish clans or something, where the people would get together and discuss everything that mattered to them before any decision was made, and everyone got to have their say. But that's long gone. The present-day democracy just demands that you vote someone in that's presented to you, and then they do whatever they want, because they're already selected before you even hear them by the Council on Foreign Relations or members that run the world. So Africa, anyway, definitely that doesn't have the democracy gene. And they've traditionally always looked up to a really strong man, often a tyrant, actually. And that's who they tend to respect. And if he's not a tyrant, they'll overthrow him, and some other guy will become the big heavy guy at the top. But they're very corrupt in their ways. They go a little bit overboard with it, more so than the West. The West, they know how to do it better, quiet offshore investments, things like that. In Africa, they tend to show off the cash, and that leads to their downfall. So the Nigerian president spent $1 million of aid money meant for poverty-stricken country on star-studded festival featuring Beyonce and Jay-Z. It says money was released for This Day Music Festival in Lagos 2006. It was money from the Bielsa State Poverty Alleviation Fund in Nigeria. Beyonce and Jay-Z performed at the festival along with other American performers to tell the world through music that Nigeria's time has come. So he spent $1 million in aid money for his big to-do. And it's a letter stamped and signed by Bielsa state officials in 2006 revealed that President Goodluck Jonathan, then the governor of the state, released 150 million Nigerian nairas from the state's Poverty Alleviation Fund for the inaugural This Day Music Festival in the city of Lagos 2006. This document suffers after the reality TV star Kim Kardashian was reportedly paid $500,000 for a fleeting appearance in Lagos last week, angering Nigerian commentators. Well, that's standard stuff, you know. We often get conned into these charity things and all the rest of it because there's nothing more corrupt than charities. There's really nothing more corrupt. It's the easiest money there is. In fact, the big foundations that run the world, like Rockefeller's, Ford, Carnegie, and a whole bunch of other ones, they own trillions and trillions of dollars. And they can, as I say, pay off whole armies of NGOs or other kind of armies for that matter if they want. But they run the world. And they put money forward too to decide who becomes prime minister, presidents, and so on. They back them. And their members are all members of the Council on Foreign Relations, which of course the Rockefeller Foundations really control for America, on behalf of the British counterpart, which is the Royal Institute for International Affairs. So anyway, as I say, here's the guy gone too far. Nothing will happen because if he's on board with the world agenda and the IMF and the World Bank, he'll get off with it. They won't bother. And that's how things really work. It's all, say, politics, isn't it? And also Bono's One Foundation, it's called One Foundation for his charity drive. Who doesn't mind? I mean, he's been on television many times. They work together with the big bankers, you understand. And what they do is to ask governments to forgive third world countries' debts. And then, of course, the first world countries are asked to give them another loan, which the first world country borrows from the World Bank through the IMF, through the IMF. And then you give them another loan. See, I understand the ones who are loaning out the cash never lose. It's not written off and tossed to the wind. The countries back home are left with you're the guarantor for the debts. You have to pay it off. All the taxpayers pay it off. So the banks love this kind of, oh, please let the people off with it. And you say, okay, your prime minister or president say, okay, we'll let them off with it. And so they don't have to pay this again. But you're stuck with the debt, the taxpayer. And then your boss again will give them another loan. And it's a merry-go-round, beautiful merry-go-round between the World Bank, the IMF, and the heads of your countries that are put in place by other folk. So anyway, Bono's One Foundation under fire for giving a little over 1% of its funds to charity. And the Anti-Poverty Foundation, One, is under pressure to explain its finances after it's revealed only a small percentage of money it raises reaches the needy. The non-profit organization set up by the U2 frontman received almost £9.6 million in donations in 2008, but handed out only $118,000 to good causes. And it says the figures are published by the New York Post also show that £5.1 million went towards paying salaries. When you set up a charity, you and your board members can draw as many millions as you want for your paychecks. There's no law against it. Back with more after this. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix. Most folk don't know, but when any big business or say factory type work is considered to go into any area, they do their various engineering surveys and health surveys and so on, and they actually work out the acceptable death rates that will be from the fallout of these plants that they put up. I knew an engineer, top engineer at one of the big nuclear plants in Pickering. And he said to me that they did that whole survey for that area. And they knew there'd be lots of leukemia and cancers of all kinds that would hit youngsters too, brain cancers and so on. But they actually worked out what was the acceptable death rate from that as opposed to the economic benefit from having the plants there for electricity. That's how they do it for everything. But China is just finding this out, of course, and it says that decades of reckless pollution have spawned a string of toxic cancer villages that Chinese government admitted for the first time yesterday. And the Readmission Environment Ministry accepted the country's 30-year breakneck industrial boom and lax laws had caused many environmental disasters and led to a spike in cancer-related deaths. It says in recent years, toxic and hazardous chemical pollution has caused many environmental disasters, cutting off drinking water supplies and even leading to severe health and social problems such as what they call cancer villages. Like I said before, you find them around nuclear plants too in every country. The ministry said in its damning report. And factories in rural communities spout a deadly toxic cocktail and poison the soil, groundwater and air for hundreds of villages and millions of people. And major cities, including the capital Beijing, are so badly affected by smog and forced to issue regular health warnings for residents to stay indoors to avoid hazardous air quality. Well, it was again a fast boom for China. They were built up by the West and given all the factories through the GATT Treaty, and that we didn't vote for, of course. All your factories went up and left you. And they just put them over there and just didn't bother putting any filters on the stacks or anything else. And now you end up with that. Plus they were dumping polluted water from the factories straight into rivers. Some of them ended up just like sludge, total sludge. Nothing lived in them. And I've had various documentaries out over the years on that. But that's the way it goes. So now they've got their cancers going through the roof there. And that article I read yesterday, now the poor are selling their, and most folk in China are still poor, believe it or not, because it's a top-down, heavy, controlled system. And which is again the model for the United Nations. I said that was the model for the world to copy, was China, where they have all these millions of peasants at the bottom and this hierarchy of hereditary type commissars running it under a communist flag. So I guess, as I say, they're selling their kidneys off the poor folk now. I guess they'll drop in price now that they're all prone to cancer. They'll be second-class kidneys. This article too is interesting because there's nothing appears in the media that, especially when it's something that's been out before under different guises, when it comes out again, it's something's being pushed. An idea is being pushed. And the idea is eugenics, of course. Eugenics has always been into what makes a person tick, what makes a person disobey authority, stuff like that. And at one time they'd measure your skull and they'd measure the space between your eyes, your nose and all this kind of stuff. And they even had different kind of ears. If you had a little kink in an ear back in the early 1920s, you were liable to be a prisoner, they claimed. And then they changed that to an elongated ear, then a short one. And they keep changing everything, of course. But now, once you bring science into it, you understand, once you bring science in, it's harder to argue. See, that's why they use all this nonsense. Eugenics is always eugenics. But it mentions that prisoners in Scotland jail should undergo tests for signs of brain injury. I've mentioned this before. And be prescribed mood-altering drugs to help bring down reoffending rates, right? So it's down to brain injury again. We're back to something's wrong with the brain, because all the folk are supposed to be happy, obedient slaves, obedient to authority and never object and complain to anything. If you do, and you break tradition, there's something, you obviously have a brain injury. This is how they think. It's been here for about 100 years, this theory. And neuroscientists are in on the game, of course, and they're trying to say, look at that little dark patch in the front there. That's, psychopaths have that too, apparently. But not all psychopaths break the law. You see? You forget that as well. In fact, some of the articles I've put up in the past and documentaries that were done by top leading psychologists, they tested themselves and found out they were psychopaths. But they hadn't broken all the laws, you see. So it's all bunkum. But again, they always clutch at anything that's found out to be new, or some technology comes along and lets them see something new. And they immediately have their conclusions already. Studies have shown that up to half the prison population have suffered brain trauma caused by accidents and assaults that could be a factor in persistent offending. Well, I mean, if you tested every boxer, what would you find there for brain trauma? But did it go out and cause crime? No. They understand neuroscience wants to get really big into the acts of the legal system and the correctional system. You understand they're trying to make themselves into a science. It's not just to end in prisons, it's to end up controlling all of us. Because they want you all eventually to be scanned with these probabilities or possibility factors to see if they can categorize you as they follow you down through life. You understand? It's always been that way. So I'll put this link up tonight too. It's a PR thing, obviously. But they also want to use mood-altering drugs to help bring down reoffending can be brought down by putting them on drugs. Have you seen the crime rates in countries like the States? How many people are killed and knifed and all the rest of it and clubbed to death for a few bucks to buy drugs? Huh? Have you seen someone who'll do anything when they go through withdrawal to get the money for the drugs? Back with more after this break.
listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network. Because you can handle the truth.
Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, talking about the big system. Every facet of your life is controlled. Everything you'll even like and watch is controlled. And they have psychologists working in lots of the programs and movies, and psychiatrists too, that you watch. And I remember reading the article from the Coronation Street, the new Coronation Street that was out a few years ago. And you saw this list of psychiatrists and psychologists that work with them all the time, and sociologists and healthcare workers and so on it went, because you see, you're being programmed by everything that you watch. And that's the function of, it's weaponized. And of course the storyline generally is to bring in things that you don't like at all, or you have particular opinions about, and you don't like. So they try to bring you in, suck you into the stories and get you watching it with a little bit of a mystery involved, of course, hoping you'll keep watching it. Then they introduce that the main star is something or other that you probably would have objected to. And that's how they get you sucked in. But of course, the sex and violence is nothing new in it. Only it's been stepped up as we become really so jaded with it that nothing bothers us anymore. Because you see, eventually, you'll get dragged off the streets yourself too for looking at the camera the wrong way. That's watching you see. And so we're all being trained. And after all the scandals at the BBC, which they really, really covered over, it's on the go. It's still the same thing's going on the go. Same people working there yet. Same agenda. Remember, it works for the government. The government always uses the BBC for its propaganda outlets, and propaganda is also indoctrination. But it says the BBC Trust ruled, it says here, that the episode, this television episode of a long-standing drama, which includes scenes of a prison officer assaulting a victim in a toilet cubicle with a baton. And you can imagine what that's for. Maybe there's a lot of flies there or something. Was too explicit for the series. The broadcaster received 632 complaints about the episodes, which one complainant said he'd found extremely upsetting and thoroughly nasty. And they're at it right away after this, you see, the scandal things. This is the trash that they've put out there. Silent Witness, which stars Emilia Fox, is now in its 15th series. The offending episode was broadcast 22nd of April 2012 between 9 and 10 p.m. 26 of the complaints were made because scheduling had overrun, meaning that viewers tuning into the BBC One at 10 p.m. would have seen the programme's conclusion. And that's how they'll do. You see, they'll wait till the end and then they get that pool. So you've got sex, which is meant to turn folk on by the way, coupled with violence, sadomasochism, and this is projected into the population. It's intentional. And so there, they put it in at the conclusion. One man said he turned on his TV to watch the news at 10 and was confronted by a seriously disturbing scenes of utter degradation, extreme violence with sexual overtones. Then responding to the complaint, the program's PR producer said, it was not an attempt to gratuitously shock the audience, but was part of a storyline establishing a policewoman's complicity in the brutality of a male prison officer. She argued that it had been scheduled after the watershed and that after 50 series, audiences would be familiar with the nature of content included in the Silent Witness. So they must be building you up to this, one scene after another. It gets more and more graphic. This is how they do things, understand? And she pretty well admits it there. In other words, if you were watching up to the 15th series, the audience would be familiar with the nature of content included in Silent Witness. You've been degraded all along, bit by bit. But in its ruling, the BBC Trust said that viewers were left in no doubt that an act of sexual violence was being carried out, even though the sexual attack wasn't shown. The complaints director said he felt the programme makers may have misjudged the feelings of the audience about this sort of material and the leeway that the audience would permit them based on previous episodes. So I'll continue, of course, and also have the ones who'll be into this stuff now that want them to come back anyway. Don't put them off there, keep them going, because we like this kind of, trash. But that's what you get in this day and age, isn't it? That's how everyone walks around cursing and swearing now. Yes, they hear it all from the TV and the movies. And children do it too, because that's where they get it as well. Completely alters culture. That's what it's for. It's the purpose of it. And also, too, in Britain, they're cutting back benefits to, tax benefits from councils and so on at the expense of getting people with no money to pay up. Now, it's affecting a lot of the disabled folk. And it says, unlike the bedroom tax, now if you get an extra room, you get taxed on that now, too. This is getting crazy, but there's no end to this as we get plundered. That's our only purpose, is to be plundered at the bottom. Which only affects tenants of councils and housing associations. Changes to council tax benefits from April will also affect owner-occupiers and private tenants. It's currently claimed by 5.9 million recipients and is the most widely claimed means-tested benefit. Local authorities have been asked by the government to replace council tax benefit with new local schemes to reduce the amount of council tax relief councils can pay out. So, as I say, the main thing is, I've already had some people in Britain who are disabled who get this relief, really worried that they'll be on the street shortly. But that's the agenda now. Well, you see, actually this next article will tie in with it. Disabled children cost too much and should be put down. Meaning like an animal at the vet, So who says this? A counsellor. One of these counsellors, of course, is probably all for this tax cut on the people who are disabled. To stand down after his outrageous rant, it says, Councillor Colin Brewer refuses to quit and has apologised to Disability Cornwall. He told BBC Radio that the timing wasn't good because of upcoming elections. It's all about to do with timing, right? And it says here that the councillor told a charity worker who helps youngsters with special needs that disabled children cost the council too much money and should be put down. Brewer, 68, an independent councillor at Cornwall Council, has refused to stand down after making the depraved remark to the member of a charity during an information event. What he said has received widespread condemnation, including that of Katie Price, whose son Harvey is severely disabled. Mr. Brewer admitted that he made the comment to provoke a reaction. He's telling the truth in that little part, provoke a reaction. Because you understand, they have shock jocks out there. And they tend to get a following, And the more foul often they can be, the more following they get. And because we're also most of society is totally degraded now, you see. And also gets a stimulation of talk, pro and con. Should you have said that? Should you not? Etc. Because remember, I've read last year from a panel of experts, bioethicists, talking about the same thing at the BBC. Try and get folks to say, let's look at this whole thing differently. Is it better to euthanize them at birth? You see. So he's trying to provoke a reaction. So he's in with some group or other and has now been forced to apologize in writing for the offensive remark. However, he remains defiant and refuses to stand down, saying it's not something I would consider resigning over. I bet he wouldn't. It says, I believe I'm doing a good job. So that's what you've got in the world today. And as I say, everything's got a meaning behind it. There's a purpose behind it to get you all talking. See, when you're familiarized with a topic that you didn't used to be, you'd have a closed mind on something, which is good. Society used to exist pretty well on closed minds to everything that are weird and detrimental to them. Once you get to open up, let's see this in a different way, a different point of view, then you're done for. Someone's got a big plan for you. And from Australia it says it's official, and this is, I think it's Lord Monckton, he says, what I was held down and banned for telling the recent UN climate conference in Doha is true. There has been no global warming for 17 years. Rajendra Pachari, the railroad engineer who heads the UN's accident-prone climate panel, the IPCC, recently admitted this fact here in Australia. The Hadley CRU temperature record shows no warming for 18 to 9 or 19 years. RSS satellites show none for 23 years. Not one computer model predicted that. And Pachari said that the zero trend would have to persist for 30 to 40 years before it mattered. In other words, before they could see that something was wrong. Scientists disagree, naturally, because they're all getting paid money for it. In 2008, the modelers wrote that more than 14 years without global warming would indicate a discrepancy between their predictions and reality. By their own criterion, they've grossly, persistently, very profitably exaggerated man-made global warming. The 17-year flatline gives Australia's $180,000 a year part-time climate commissar Tim Flannery. Not bad, eh? A problem. It says, in January he crowed with that extreme weather like Sydney's recent heat wave had been predicted for decades. Skeptics, he wailed, continue to ignore the thousands of hot weather records tumbling worldwide, yet without statistically significantly warming for nigh on 2 decades, recent extreme weather cannot be blamed on global warming. This is warming that was predicted yesterday but has not happened for up to 23 years until today, cannot have been caused yesterday's droughts and flooding rains now, can it? But anyway, Flannery relentlessly gives only one side of the story when it's his duty to give both. He's carefully silent about the thousands of cold weather records that have also tumbled in recent years, more than 650 records this week in the US alone for cold weather. And the Northern Hemisphere is enduring one of its coldest winters in 100 years. Before the usual suspects try to blame that too on global warming, the IPCC says, unsurprisingly, that warmer weather means less snow. Sea ice extent in the Arctic has reached a record high for this time of year, despite a record low last summer. It always thaws in the summer and packs on ice in the winter, you understand? And it says in the Arctic, sea ice has been increasing for the last 33 years. There will be further extreme weather in the coming decades. It will not matter whether the world warms or cools. Extreme weather is not the new normal. It's the old normal, but the new slogan. The best kept secret in climate science is extreme weather or tipping points will be no likelier. If the planet warms, then it cools. For the climate behaves like a chaotic object. What mathematicians call bifurcations can occur at any time. So I'll put this up tonight as well for those who still are following that part. But it's crazy, isn't it, too, as we get sprayed like bugs from all the aerial spraying and stuff. And there's not a peep out in that. No one will talk on it at the top. Also takes about 2 years or more for anything that's been said on shows like this one to get into the mainstream. And eventually they catch on, probably because they've got not much news out there. I mean, even all their sex stories are jaded. They've put so much out over the years that folk don't bother reading them anymore. They get jaded. But the Daily Mail says a swine flu jab linked to sleep disorder. And it fears that 1 million children received a jab that can increase the risk of narcolepsy. And that was the pandemics, of course. It was the main vaccine used in the UK during the swine flu pandemic 3 years ago. And it said almost 1 million children were given the swine flu jab, which put them at increased risk of the sleep disorder narcolepsy. The new research says the pandemic's vaccine carries a 14-fold extra risk of triggering narcolepsy, in which sufferers can fall asleep suddenly and unexpectedly. Well, it happened in Finland. Lots of them happened there, and I think some in Sweden too. And I've got the articles here I've read over the years. It says for every 55,000 doses delivered, it's estimated around 1 child develops the condition. And it was given to 6 million people in high-risk groups, including children and those with conditions such as diabetes, heart disease, and asthma. At the height of the pandemic between October 2009 and 2010, more than 850,000 English children aged 6 months to 16 years were given the vaccine. It was also given to 170,000 people, including children, when supplies of seasonal flu vaccine were in short supply between October 2010 and February 2011. And it says it shows that children vaccinated here were also more likely to develop the disorder, although the experts that said it was okay, stress pandemics has not been used for nearly 2 years, and the period of highest risk was within a few months of getting the jab. So folks still line up to get the jabs, all stuff to get squirted into their bodies, and, well, you can't really help them, can you? Because the brainwashing is superb, isn't it? Just massive propaganda campaigns. Massive, isn't it? Also, it says whistleblower Mark Klein provided this now 6-year-old photo of a secret room in San Francisco AT&T switching center, which he claimed housed data mining equipment that enables the government to spy on electronic communications. So the divided Supreme Court halted a legal challenge Tuesday to a one-secret warrantless surveillance project that gobbles up Americans' electronic communications, a program that Congress eventually legalized in 2008 and again in 2012. The 5-4 decision in the PDF link I'll put up tonight too on that by Justice Samuel Alito was a clear victory for the President Barack Obama's administration, which, like its predecessor, argued that government wiretapping laws cannot be challenged in court. What's more, the outcome marks the first time the Supreme Court decided any case touching on the eavesdropping program that was secretly employed in the wake of 9/11 by the then President George W. Bush and eventually codified into law twice by Congress. A High Court majority concluded that because the eavesdropping is done secretly, The American Civil Liberties Union, journalists and human rights groups that sued to nullify the law have no legal standing to sue, because it's done secretly, so you can't sue them. This is because they have no evidence they are being targeted, because it's done in secret, right? Some of the plaintiffs, which the court labelled respondents, are also journalists and, amongst other things, claimed that 2008 legislation has chilled their speech and violated their Fourth Amendment privacy rights. Well, it's true, it's training you, if you're a journalist, not to say certain things and just talk about the usual rubbish. You know, that's true enough. Now, a controversial strategy to combat internet piracy took effect Monday. This is interesting. Meaning subscribers who illegally share movies or songs could be punished by losing web access or having their broadband speeds slowed to a crawl. The new copyright alert system, or Six Strike system, is a result of a partnership between major internet service providers and the entertainment industry to deter theft of copyright material online. The film and recording industry say online piracy costs them billions of dollars in lost revenue each year. A trade group representing the entertainment industry and internet providers announced the move in a blog post on Monday. I'll pull all these links up tonight at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Under the new system, internet subscribers accused of online privacy will receive a series of alerts. Critics have called the system Six Strikes because the sixth copyright violation is expected to lead to punishment from the internet providers. The details of each internet provider's alert system are still unknown. I guess it's top secret, eh? But each one is expected to be slightly different. Under Verizon's proposed plan, which leaked online last month, alleged copyright violators could have their internet speeds slowed to dial-up speeds for 2 or 3 days. I would never know, because they give me that anyway on satellite. This is under Time Warner's Cable's plan. The company will temporarily suspend internet service to alleged copyright violators until they call a customer service rep and agree to stop pirating copyright material. And it says in a blog post Monday, Jill Lesser, executive director of the Center for Copyright Information, wrote that the alerts are meant to educate rather than punish, and will direct them to legal alternatives and allow them to seek an independent review if they believe they are innocent. Under Verizon's proposed plan, alleged copyright violators must pay $35 to have an arbitrator review whether they are guilty of internet piracy. If the arbitrator rules in their favor, their money is refunded and their internet speeds go untouched. Some industry observers have questioned whether the alert system will be effective. Some note that internet users who frequently engage in illegal file sharing often use private networks or proxy services to disguise location of their computers. Others worry that small businesses that provide Wi-Fi access could be accused of copyright violations if their customers engaged in illegal file sharing on the networks. So everything's getting controlled and policed and everything else like it was meant to happen when they first gave you the internet. First they get you hooked, then they police it, then they rule you and your thoughts. Back with more after this. Hi folks, we're back, cutting through the matrix, and we'll go to, there's a caller hanging on there from John from New York, if he's still there. You're still there, John?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Just thinking about this propaganda matrix we're living in, I was as a kid growing up actually in New York City watching even Sesame Street, even living in New York City, living in an all-white neighborhood, seeing this multicultural. It was a little strange from growing up. Looking at it later, even look at the founders of Sesame Street. One of them is Lord Morrison,
yeah.
The CFR, vice president of the Merkle Group. He actually lives down in my neighborhood. I'm looking at the tax records when they show all the donations or political donations. I'm looking at this fellow, and he don't even donate to the Republican or the Democrats. He only makes one donation for the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's to a group called Emily's List, which is really abortion rights organization. So this so-called benevolent lover of children bringing Sesame Street, teaching kids to read and learn, and actually wants to kill them all. So
that's
no
right.
surprise to you, but just interesting. I guess the soccer moms out there.
That's right. And it works every time because, again, everyone is pretty decent and like charities. It sounds good. Charity sounds up there in the sky somewhere. And you have no idea what they're really up to or where the money is going. And folk would be shocked, absolutely shocked to find out exactly where money is going. I mean, disastrously so, because Because these big charities, there's no trick dirty enough. They use the top, they've got so much money too, they use the top marketers to dream up new ways of terminology basically, to sell the idea to the people who give generously and have no idea that these people literally are the biggest sharks in the world, and they do have a negative agenda on the general population. They want to bring down populations and so on. And it's like family planning. You don't call it the abortion industry, you call it family planning. And, of course, Margaret Sanger said that children are weeds. She wanted to destroy different races altogether. And she's still lauded by the top eugenicists today for her act. So people have no idea as we're giving money to these things that what it was really for. People are still giving money to these organizations as they go aborting children across the world because they go under women's health issues. It sounds like they're going to give good health care to women. It's for abortion across the third world. But they're all into this stuff. And you just can't really help people who get sucked in so easily. If they get sucked in on that and they believe things at face value, they get sucked into everything that's out there. And I've always said we're given our leaders and people get sucked into them. They really are given their leaders. Every facet of it is given they're given their leaders. But thanks for calling. And also, I mean, just as an example, John Pilger, who's done a lot of good stuff out there on what's happening with big corporations and so on. And he's up in this article here on the Marxist blog. He's going to speak at one of the top World Marxist Meetings 2013 conference. Says the world-renowned journalist, author, and documentary filmmaker began in 1958 in his home in Australia. He regards eyewitness as the essence of good journalism and so on. And he goes on about the corporations, etc., etc. But here he is as a speaker at the top Marxist conference for world Marxism. And Noam Chomsky, I don't know if he's going there too, but he also gives him praise in this article at the Marxist site. And other ones too are give him praise for what he's done. He's done a lot of good stuff, but they want to bring in the other side of the same coin. See, both the sides meet on the same road, down the road. The controlled society, expertly run. Same thing. From Hamish myself from Ontario, Canada, it's good night to me, your God or your gods go with you. Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 28th of February 2013. Newcomers, as always, help yourself to the audios at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And you can also get print-ups too. If you go into that site, print-ups for in English and all the sites listed. Plus, if you go into alanwattsentinel.eu, you can get transcripts for print-up in other languages. So there's audios and print-ups available there too. Remember too, you're the audience that bring me to you. And it's up to you if you want to keep me going or not, because times are awfully hard, as we all know that. In fact, businesses are falling all over the place. Big corporations too. Big corporate businesses and shops and so on are just closing down in all countries right now. But it's inflation. Of course, it's inflation. They're always devaluing the currency. They have been for your whole life and long before you were born, actually. It's built into the system. And for those who want to keep this particular broadcast going, they can certainly help me tick along too. And you can buy the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, or you could donate. And remember, from the US to Canada, you can still use personal checks or international postal money orders. It doesn't matter how much either. And you can send cash or use PayPal. Across the world, Western Union, MoneyGram, and PayPal. Because I say things are getting tight too, and my expenses are going up all the time too. Plus I'm fighting with ExplorerNet right now, the satellites I'm using here, because they tend to try and go after you every 2 years or so to make you upgrade. They tell you your stuff's not working so they can sell you new gear. It's a standard with ExplorerNet. And I've been going through that for 2 weeks now. 2 weeks solid. That's why I've been late getting stuff up. I either get internet or they cut me off altogether. So, as I say, it's their sales pitch. They just switch you off at the other end, of course. And then they make you jump through hoops at your end thinking it's your equipment. It's not my equipment at all. It's all tested. So that's how they're doing it, ExplorerNet. But this is a standard after sales market stuff they go through. They sell about $1,000 to each person per time the guy comes out to put anything in. Anyway, I could use your help too to keep going. As I say too, what I do here on this broadcast is go through the system, the real system you're living in. Without the hoopla, without the circus, you see. I don't believe in circuses. I just give you the plain truth as it happens to be. It's logic and reason. And I go through the history of the system you're born into and how it was set up, who set it up, the organizations they control, which is worldwide. The very fact that one organization has been responsible for putting in governments for the last 100 years, the prime ministers and presidents all belong to this one organization. And their own personal historian, a professor, talked about it in one of his books. So you're living through an agenda, like a big long-term business plan, in fact. And even, especially, I shouldn't say even, wars are definitely planned way ahead. It takes a lot of work to get wars on the go, and logistics and everything else all set up long before they actually go into battle and take over countries in order to loot them. And they even have to spend years just getting the propaganda departments and spins all worked out with all their handouts that they'll eventually hand out to the press to download onto you. That's the real world that you live in. And the system they're going through right now is a transitory system. This is the century of change. That's why Obama kept saying a change was good. And academia was using that term last century because they knew the 21st century coming up, which we're in now, of course, is the century of change. When the big long-term agenda was to be fulfilled, man was to be completely retrained, and the lower types, the excess population types that don't need any more, if there's no industry for you, are to die off through sterility and simply not having children and so on. It's all working to plan as we go along. And also, too, they're planning for the big collapse because the bank collapses are planned ahead, long ahead, too, way ahead in advance, to bring in austerity and to get used to consuming less. Because, you see, they don't need you so much anymore. There's up-and-coming countries where they can sell all their products to down the road. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, we're back, cutting through the matrix and talking about low-level reality. That's the general reality of most people. It's low-level reality. There's many higher levels above this, and I've always mentioned before in previous talks, there's about 3 levels of all sciences. And the ones at the bottom level, the university level, dealt with by professors and so on, that's the bottom level of reality, which they really truly believe is the only one there is. Above them is another one too, mainly into the weapons industry and various other gadgets and gizmos that the CIA use in certain levels. And not all the CIA, of course, certain levels within a compartmentalized system. And then above them is the real ones at the very, very top. The latest weaponry and so on is never given out to the public. Even knowledge of it is never given out to the public. So whenever we're told about something, you can guarantee it's about 20, 25 years, 30 years old minimum. And this case in point is to do with Mail Online, like it's an exclusive story, right? And it says scientists have developed a crude form of telepathy in animals by enabling a pair of rats to pass instructions using only their mind. Using microchips implanted in their brains to communicate, the rats were able to collaborate and solve simple puzzles, even though in one experiment they were thousands of miles apart. Researchers claim this is the first example of a brain-to-brain interface, raising the prospect that one day animals and humans could be able to read each other's minds. I mean, it's all about humans, folks. I mean, forget this mice and rat stuff. This is what they test them on the lower level, because it's all been done before. And it says here, and there's a telling part in this too. It says a team from Duke University in North Carolina said, as far as we can tell, these findings demonstrate for the first time. And that's the telling part right there. That a direct channel for behavioral information exchange can be established between 2 animals' brains without the use of the animals' regular forms of communication. And it goes into the different researchers and so on, and how they worked it. But you have to go way back. And I've mentioned Joseph Delgado many times before. There's videos up on YouTube. You can do a search. And he was implanting them in animals, but he's also implanting them in people too. If you go into his story, and he worked for the FBI and Department of Defense and the CIA, this guy. And he's been doing this stuff back in the 70s and 80s. And also back in the 70s in Sweden, they were using prisoners, volunteer prisoners, for direct brain-to-computer interface projects. the first test. They'd be wired right in, no doubt. It wouldn't be wireless, but it'd be wired right in. But so was the US doing the same thing as well. So here's these guys many years later starting from scratch. And it's exclusive, like it's just happening now. Everything that you get given to you by the mainstream is antique. It's actually antique. And the ones at the top are way ahead of what they're allowing out now. Way ahead of what this is about rats and so on. Anyway, says lead researcher Miguel Nihilists, pioneer of research into brain-computer interfaces, said the study was the first step towards the linking of multiple minds to form an organic computer, or brain net, that would allow sharing of information amongst groups of animals. Because it's so important to get groups of animals to share their thoughts with each other, right? Isn't it? It's nothing to do with animals. And it reminds me too of H.G. Wells' World Brain, the system that would link the whole world up together, or going into Professor Persinger, who does these kind of experiments in the field of Wi-Fi, where we'll all be linked together. We'll know each other's pains and emotions. Someone in Africa is hungry, you'll feel it over in America or Canada, and all that kind of stuff. This is all to bring in perfect peace in society. I always remember what the communists said about peace when they defined what peace meant. Because very few folk asked them. Most folk think, well, we hear what they're saying. They ask me what I think it means. Peace was defined as the absence of all opposition. And they claim that the trouble, of course, is too many people, that the people will never get on with each other, yada, 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 and we've got to control them all. So this is ideal. And it's also this article itself, too. You're going to see it come out in children in your lifetime when they put it into the brains of children who will actually want it, because they'll start putting lots more of this stuff into the movies, you see. And children love fantasy, they think it's reality. They wouldn't have superpowers and all that. But it says, we can't even predict what kind of emergent properties would appear when animals begin interacting as part of a brain net. In theory, you could imagine a combination of brains could provide solutions that individual brains cannot achieve by themselves. He said it could even lead to one animal incorporating another's sense of self. Although there are fears it could result in the development of mind control. Well, that's the whole point of it, is mind control. That's the whole point. Who's funding all this stuff? It's mind control. Remember at the Loyola University, back in 2000, I think it was 2001, they have meetings every year, and Newt Gingrich at that time led some world science meeting there, and he kicked it off by introducing the top speakers, and one of them was a professor from Japan who stated at the time, by the way, that they have chips ready to be implanted in the human population. And he said what they would achieve and so on. He said eventually the people would no longer see themselves as individuals. It would be impossible to distinguish yourself as a separate individual with your own thoughts. You would hear the whispers of other people's thoughts going to the central computers or regional computers and back again, along with your own. Now that ties in with that. When all these animals they're all like a collective here. Someone else is literally pulling the strings. And that's what they want to do with humans, understand. And they've had these meetings ever since, that one at Loyola. They said they had the chips ready, but the only problem they have now is convincing the public, step by step, to take them. So they give you trashy articles like this, like it's just, this is the stage they're at, which is rubbish. Obsolete. And everything you can think of that could possibly be done has already been done. It's already been done. And also too, necrophilia, I've mentioned that a lot of times because out of the Frankfurt School, Theo Adorno, who also said that all humanity was sick except one group. And they'd have to all have to be altered because they're all psychotic. If they didn't like something, then they were psychotic. And therefore they'd all have to be treated or altered. But he said that we'll have to destroy all their cultures. And he mentioned all the list of the things that have actually happened since. It's all happened. Destroy all the cultures until nothing stands together in a complete comprehensive fashion of structure. It all falls apart. And that's what we're living in today. Families fall apart. Communities are at war with each other. Sometimes it's gangs all over the place. And even got gangs of cops in the US. We know that from various reports when they get found out. Anyway, the fact is, everything that Adorno mentioned has happened. They even mentioned bringing the public down to such a based state of beyond sexuality, sadomasochism into necrophilia. And of course, cannibalism is becoming all the rage apparently in the media. And this is America's cannibal cop had a British mentor, the court hears. The New York police officer accused of conspiring to kill and eat up to 100 women was in contact with a man in Britain who appeared to be instructing him in how to be a cannibal. You don't see that on TV, this new chef stuff, they don't have that on. Gilberto Valle, 28, America's so-called cannibal cop, exchanged emails, instant messages with someone in the UK who used the screen moniker Moody Blues and an email address containing the name Meat Market Man. A series of grisly communications between the two were read to a court in Manhattan in which Moody Blues claimed to have eaten a 5-year-old child. Some of the passages described cooking and eating women. In one email, Val told Moody Blues that a softball player he knew was the most desirable piece of meat I've ever met, and that he planned to follow her home. Now, I know the price of meat's going up, certainly, but this is a bit much. It says, Moody Blues then suggested knocking her out with a baseball bat for poetic justice. At one point, Valle said he wanted to be the British man's assistant and asked him for expert advice on eating human flesh, asking, out of curiosity, are feet edible? And the correspondent replied, yes, pretty much everything is. But it turns out, anyway, that they found the person in Britain who I think is a male nurse who's married anyway, and he and his wife deal with children, and people who live in special homes for people with disabilities and things like that. There's another article on that. But it just shows you how society is going the right way. I mean, the whole thing with the Frankfurt School was to take account of how a culture is strong. Because cultures outside this person's own culture, they consider were their enemies. And they'd have to completely destroy the cultures. Completely destroy the cultures. And that's where we are today. It's happened. Now, Jimmy Savile, of course, that was well protected by bigwigs. And they'll never get the names of them because it's too important. There are too many up there in the House of Lords and all that. And too many sirs involved. But it says here that his breakfast club, as they called it in the morning, his police friends faced new questions because they protected them too from inquiries. The West Yorkshire Police has launched an inquiry into social visits by on-duty officers to weekly tea parties held at Jimmy Savile's penthouse flat. The force is questioning members of the disgraced late entertainer's inner circle over the so-called Friday morning club. Although Savile was open about his friendships with officers, the force said in October last year it's got no information on their participation in gathering at Savile's flat in Roundhay Park, Leeds. At the time, a spokesman said officers were free to do what they wished when off duty. The force has now confirmed, however, that officers regularly attended when on duty after being encouraged to interact more with the community. So they go to him, like he's the community, right? What did Savile offer the folk? We know what Savile offered the folk. He was a getter, he was a fixer. A spokesman said there was no evidence of wrongdoing, but added, we're now carrying out further inquiries to obtain a better understanding of the circumstances surrounding the contact between West Yorkshire police officers and Savile at the so-called Friday morning breakfast club. By the way, a lot of the people who came forward to complain about Savile's attacking them or raping them were actually given visits by the police in the early days and told to leave it alone, even threatening stuff. That came out in the papers before too. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, I'm back cutting through the matrix and talking about the system that we're in. Now, when every country goes down the tubes, you see all the signs that come in play by government. They pass different laws to allow certain things that were forbidden before as you go down the tubes, because this is a time of plunder. There's always a big stage of plunder by everyone at the top before it goes down the tubes into the next stage. It's not the end of everything, it's just to go into the next stage, a new system, which is already drafted up and so on, a new way of living. Many articles out there about it. This is the transition, the age of transition. Anyway, gambling is one of them. And it says Christie signs New Jersey's internet gambling bill into law. And next to that one too, I've got another one. It's Vermont makes progress in new gambling law. So this is going to be the big thing. Is the poor folk again who are all broke and trying to pay their rents, or everything's increasing, their mortgages, everything's going up. They'll go there hoping, just like a scratch and win, hoping to win. And of course they lose everything, and it causes more problems. But it's not the government's problems, because those folk end up in the street. It's their problem. So it's just a sign of the times, as I say. Now the Green Lobby too, we know about the massive campaigning with the incredible amounts of money they get in from the big foundations that own them, basically, because they're all fronts, you understand, for other reasons. Their reason is to get new laws in to control every single person's life across the whole world, basically. That's what it's for, from birth to death. Total control, the authoritarian society, the Club of Rome idea, post-democratic and so on, into Agenda 21. And your new commissariats will be, or commissioners that will be dealing with you in your little community area, unelected people that are appointed. This is a new upgraded Soviet system. And that's what the Green Lobby is all about. Nothing to do with saving the planet and all that stuff and the global warming and hype. Like I said before, the Club of Rome came up with the idea. They were tasked with finding something to unite the planet, to give up and share the wealth and all that, redistribution of wealth, according to Karl Marx. And so this is the way that they hit on it. We hit on the global warming, famine, drought, and so on. That would fit the bill. And here we are with it. So they're losing public. The public don't believe so much in it anymore. You see, even with the massive campaigns and billions of dollars spent on advertising and documentaries to brainwash them, and lots of fear mongering, most people no longer consider global warming a serious issue in a recession. It says concerns about the environment have reached a 2-decade low since the start of the financial crisis. A global survey has revealed. Fewer people now consider pollution, species loss and freshwater shortages to be very serious problems that at any time since tracking began 20 years ago. And the fears over global warming are far lower than they were between 2003 and 2008, with less than 1 person in 2 regarding it as very serious. I think it's a lot less than that, actually. It's a lot less than that. And of course, all the activists are upset about it after all their hard work and propaganda. His concern about air and water pollution, as well as biodiversity, is significantly below where it was even in the 90s, found the poll of more than 22,000 people in 22 countries. Many of the sharpest falls have taken place in the past 2 years, as increased fears of economic meltdown pushed worries of man-made environmental catastrophe. They don't want to say global warming, right? From the public consciousness, because in the States, 650 records are being broken this winter, just with snowfalls and cold. Same in Canada, I think, too. So climate concerns drop first in industrialized countries because we're the first ones to get hit with the higher fees and all that. But this year's figures show that concerns now fall in major developing economies such as Brazil and China as well. The findings are drawn from the GlobeScan Radar annual tracking poll, and it gives you all the data on that too. And then all the fear-mongering guys are at the bottom of this article here, like David Nussbaum, head of environmental pressure group WWF, UK, told The Independent that political leadership was required to maintain the fight against climate change. Isn't that kind of crazy? Fighting climate change, it's always been changing. We didn't have to fight it before. It'll go whichever way it wants to go. As I read from that Moncton article yesterday, which I might put up again tonight. That's if they keep me on the internet here and don't bump me off again. But they're always fear-mongering and vastly overstating their claims because they say that they need fear, they need the public to be afraid to get them to act. Now, Mexico is a basket case. It's always been a basket case because it's like Africa. Corruption is normal there. And they don't see it as being abnormal in Mexico. If a cop stops you down there, you pull out your wallet and there's your cash, and he takes it, and away he goes, and away you go, and that's how his business is done. In Mexico. It's always been that way. And it's a normal way down there. But as Mexico, drug violence turns churches into fortresses. And the violence in northern Mexico has forced residents to take extraordinary steps to ensure their safety following several years of a deadly conflict between the Mexican government, security forces, and various drug cartels. For example, to the west of Monterrey in the state of Nuevo Leon, a Catholic priest has enclosed the parish church with fortress-like reinforced concrete walls and armor plating over windows to protect his parishioners. Reverend Scott Michael McDermott, Eichhorst, built 20-foot walls around the parish church of St. Teresa of Avila in Colonia, Mirasol, and also pays for 9 armed guards to patrol the church perimeter 24 hours a day. Violent clashes and the loss of innocent life prompted the Catholic priests to take action. According to a report by the FIDES, that's FIDES news service, Eichhorst said one of these clashes lasted about 40 minutes. There was chaos, adding people didn't know what was happening. So for this reason, to immediately warn the faithful of what happens outside, we placed 2 traffic lights in the church. Red indicates clashes, deaths, or mobilization of armed police. Yellow, suspicious vehicles or armed police outside the church. And green means go ahead and that the road is safe. Quite something, eh? Quite something. But we're all the same, you know. We're all the same across the world. Back with more after this.
You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network. Because you can handle the truth.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt, talking about the system we're living in. And what a system it is, isn't it really? We live at, as I say, the bottom level of reality. And there's different realities above us, of course. And the media's job is to throw out the trash to us, just like droppings, left over. And it's enough, mind you, there's all chatting about it and so on, unless you look behind it and see what's up. But it says Mexico's the most powerful woman in Mexico, right, was formally charged with a massive embezzlement scheme on Wednesday, standing grim-faced behind bars live on national television, which many call a clear message that the new government is asserting its authority. The country watched wrapped as a national teachers union head. This is the most powerful person in the country. National teachers union head. Elba Esther Gordillo heard the charges against her read by a judge in a grim prison in eastern Mexico City. It says Gordillo was charged with embezzling 2 billion pesos, about $160 million from union funds, and was arrested Tuesday afternoon as she returned from San Diego for a meeting of leaders of the 1.5 million member National Union of Education Workers she's led for nearly a quarter century. She was heading the union's fight with President Enrique Pena Nieto's administration over the country's most sweeping educational reform in more than 70 years. And her arrest came a day after the president signed the reform into law. And, but my God, this is pretty standard down there. Pretty standard. It's always been the history of Mexico. But that's her, at least up there. No, where she is off with, she might very well do. It's also who you know, It's also who you know. It's very, very important, that. And also, too, talking about, the BBC, as I say, the BBC is just an incredible system. And I think I mentioned it the other day there too about their sadistic sexual violence system or story that came out about, they got all these complaints, 632 complaints where they had some woman, warden or something with a truncheon in a prisoner, in a jail. This is a drama. And they claimed, of course, that those who were watching the whole series would not be shocked. Meaning that's you get degraded as you watch. You adapt, understand, into degradation as you watch. So folk who didn't watch it before and saw the end of it, thinking it was 10 o'clock news, were shocked. Just shows you how slick they are in degrading us all, As I said, one of the first articles I read here was about cannibalism now. Everything is sadomasochism. Understand? And then you read this one, the web porn boy at 15 years old rapes a schoolgirl. Lots of these articles about, I read one a few months ago too. But this guy was into porn. It said a boy of 15 brutally raped a schoolgirl after spending hours every day trawling hardcore porn websites. He and a friend tied up the 14-year-old girl, threatened her with knives, and put a plastic bag over her head before raping her. The battered and bruised victim had to bite through the bag to breathe and has been left psychologically scarred. Judge Simon Bernardson QC said, I have no doubt the trigger for this offence was the children's wish for experimentation following visits to internet pornography. He told the boy, the full horror of what you did only she can know. Relatives of the girl and rapist yesterday called on the government to stop kids being able to access online porn. They won't do that, folks, because you see, when they came out with the computer, remember this computer's got a whole big business to achieve, a goal to achieve, and that's to get you all on it forever. So your governments can then talk down to you. I've already mentioned the articles where government wants to be able to go into everybody's computer and talk right to you. You see? And it's also to monitor everything that you do and say and tweet and all the rest of it is for their big boys, your controllers, your owners, in other words. It's for your owners to have. And so they made sure at the very beginning, that's all you people knew about it, there's lots of pornography. Who told you? The mainstream media. Not a week went by. Oh, lots of pornography on the internet to make sure folk would go into it. And the children too. So they go into it and then they try and reenact what they're seeing on the porn sites. And so now the parents are saying, you should stop giving them access to online porn. Well, maybe the online porn shouldn't be there. Huh? But mind you too, as I say from the last article too, the BBC Silent Witness series, they call it, with the complaints about the woman with the truncheon and all the rest of it, beating up a prisoner in certain spots, that kind of fitted the baton. But the thing is, I mean, it's getting into mainstream too, you understand. As society adapts and becomes more depraved. There's no end to it, you know. And that's the point of it, that's the purpose of it. Now, again, you always see too, I mentioned this before, the group that tried to alter the culture before even the Frankfurt School got on the go. The predecessors of them, same guys in the same kind of club, you might say. But they brought out what is called the Roaring Twenties. The Roaring Twenties brought in the miniskirt for the first time. It wasn't the 60s, it was in the 20s. And the Charleston dance and the Charleston skirt and so on. But they also brought in cocaine with it, if you read your history. And they also brought in prohibition to make booze cans exciting for youngsters. Oh, it's forbidden, I'll go there. That's how it works. Never mind that we have the Bronfmans and other ones to get awfully stinking rich. Since they prepared for about 20 years for upcoming prohibition before it was passed. How did they know it was going to get passed? Anyway, part of the fallout didn't destroy society totally then at that time because with promiscuity and so on and booze and cocaine. Part of it was because they got venereal diseases and they couldn't treat it then. Didn't have the penicillins. They also had lots of pregnant girls. And abortion wasn't free in those days. And orphanages couldn't handle all the excess fallout from it too. But there was a massive increase in gonorrhea and syphilis and so on. Here's this article today. It says, cases of untreatable gonorrhea soar by 25% in a year. Getting back to what I was just saying though, they brought back the Roaring Twenties in the 1960s, again with the miniskirt. Same things, drugs again, and just do it. Have free love, they called it. Just have sex with anybody. And then, of course, that's when all the VD clinics just blossomed because of all the lineups coming in with gonorrhea and syphilis and everything else. So, and they brought the pill in at the same time too, to stop the churn, you see. So now you've got untreatable gonorrhea, and it soars by 25% in a year. And 21,000 cases of gonorrhea were diagnosed in 2011. This is just in Britain. And this is more than 20,000 new cases of the sexually transmitted infection were diagnosed. The spike has led to the launch of a new campaign to tackle the growing threat in England and Wales in a bid to reverse the trend. Health experts are hoping the first gonorrhea resistance action plan will increase awareness of the disease, like they don't know, which is the second most common bacterial STI, they call it infection, they should call it STDs now, it's infection, in England. It says the plan is especially call it that rather than disease, you know. You got a little infection. You had nothing to do with it, you know, like catching a cold. The plan established by the Health Protection Agency will monitor the global problem of increasing resistance over the last 10 years. It comes after 2011 data revealed up to a third of reported cases were repeat gonorrhea infections. Over a third of cases were in men who have sex with men, up from around a quarter in 2010. Professor Kathy Eisen, lead author of the GRASP campaign, said ensuring treatment-resistant gonorrhea strains do not persist and spread remains a major public health concern. And the GRASP, it's an unfortunate name, I think they should pick something else. GRASP Action Plan raises awareness of this important issue and sets out practical measurable actions to extend the useful life of the current recommended therapies in England and Wales. Gonorrhea is treated with a single dose of antibiotics, which are at least 95% effective, according to the NHS. That's in the first week, folks. It says, however, if left untreated, it can lead to pelvic inflammatory disease or infertility, and many other diseases as well. In England and Wales, the risk of gonorrhea resistance developing in current first-line therapies fell slightly for the first time in 5 years in 2011. However, cases of treatment failure have now been reported globally, with no new antimicrobial agents in the pipeline, in other words, antibiotics. Professor Sally Davis, England's chief medical officer, recently advised government to add the threat of infection resistance to frontline antibiotics to the Civil Emergencies Risk Register. You'll find too, and there's documentaries up there on YouTube, which were mainstream too, that some of the guys who are having sex with men, you actually see them with handfuls of all kinds of antibiotic pills, mixtures of them, taking them before they go in to have multiple sex partners. And this is part of the reason for it. I think it's part of the reason too their immune system also gets destroyed. I think so. So, things go on, you know. And Frank Stronach from Canada, it's not his real name, I put his real name up on the link tonight at cuttingthroughthematrix.com, stirs up Austrian politics with a new party. Now the guy is about 80 odd years old, but he's a guy who owned Magna International, still does, I think. And he's gone over to Austria and get himself heavily involved in politics now. He says he's glad to be returned home to Austria. And he's just worth God knows what. It's just amazing amount of money he's got. I'll put that up tonight too, for everyone in Canada who wants to see what's going on there. Disciplinary action over David Ward's, he's a politician, and I think Jews comment adjourned. This is in the BBC News. This is disciplinary proceedings against Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament David Ward, who made controversial comments about the Jews, have been adjourned by the party. The weeks follow a meeting with Nick Clegg and a Chief Whip, Alistair Carmichael. I guess they don't need S&M there too. Chief Whip. In the meeting, Mr. Ward agreed to work with Liberal Democratic Friends of Israel to identify proportionate language he could use in the future to express his views. It's all the thought police and the language police now. You can't say anything at all, even when there's no offence meant. The disciplinary process will be reviewed at a future date. He was forced to apologize last month after saying on his website that he was saddened that the Jews who suffered unbelievable levels of persecution during the Holocaust could within a few years of liberation from the death camps be inflicting atrocities on Palestinians in the new state of Israel and continue to do so on a daily basis in the West Bank and Gaza. Mr. Ward initially defended his comments and said his party's response, which is reprimanding him, had been regrettable, but later apologized for the unintended offense, which his words had. You see, it's all about who pretends they're offended now. He's insisted that neither he nor his comments were anti-Semitic. But there was subsequent controversy when a Jewish newspaper reported Mr. Ward had asked if it would satisfy his critics if he changed the words to read the Jewish community instead of the Jews. The party, this is like communist Russia. The party began full disciplinary proceedings against the Bradford East MP following the comments. In a letter to Mr. Ward written after the meeting, Alistair Carmichael wrote, at the meeting you undertook to work along with the Liberal Democratic Friends of Israel and Simon Hughes MP to identify and agree language that would be proportionate and precise in your future interventions in this debate. We'd also hope that this would allow you to achieve a better understanding of the legitimate concerns that your comments have caused within the wider Jewish community. And it goes on and on and on. And so I guess you just can't talk about certain countries anymore either and stuff like that. As we go into more and more freedom. And also too, in Canada, it's on hate laws, Toronto Star. As he's supporting the victim against the victimized. This is a weird case. And it says in the William Watcott case, Canada's Supreme Court decision has been reinforced protection against hatred for minorities. It says an anti-gay or homosexual activist, William Watcott, was charged with promoting hate after distributing flyers in Saskatchewan condemning homosexuality. The thing is, this guy, William Watcott, was an ex-homosexual prostitute. But now he's turned the other way, you see. Anyway, it says the Supreme Court of Canada stood tall Wednesday. It regularly decided that the original decision by the Saskatchewan Human Rights Tribunal against homophobic William Watcott was in fact constitutional. I refuse the word, what they're trying to get into is using psychiatric terms. Homophobic means fear of, not dislike of, or repugnance of. And that's really what most of them really mean. This decision has more than just an impact on Watcott. Despite rumblings that the latest iteration of our highest court may use the Watcott case to strike down the hate laws entirely. In fact, the exact opposite occurred. In upholding Section 14 of the Saskatchewan Human Rights Act, the Supreme Court has reinforced the country's commitment in law to ensuring that the defense of protection for minorities in the country remains solid against the winds of hatred. It says Watcott, formerly a gay prostitute turned, and again they use homophobic crusader against gays and lesbians, was brought before the Saskatchewan Human Rights Tribunal in 2002 for a series of hate-filled pamphlets attacking the gay community. He was found to be in violation of the Act and was fined $17,500 for disregarding the tribunal order to cease and desist. The Supreme Court trimmed back the fine from $17,500 to $7,500. So it's going on, and it's just getting sillier and sillier all the time, you know. Things are getting really silly. And it's meant to as well, until literally you self-police yourself. When someone asks you a question about something, you can't give them, you got to think it could be an honest answer you want to give them. But it's nothing to do with honest answers. It's now you have to rethink your language and who you're going to offend or possibly could offend, even if you don't offend anybody by using that language. It actually says that in it. It's not offending. It's that it could offend someone. You know, even if there's not one complaint. So it's free, you know, as I said, there's no such thing as free speech. And also 2, online piracy. As I said, ISPs are ordered to block access to 3 file-sharing websites. It says the Oscar-winning Argo, still in general release, was top of the downloads on Fenopy. It says, I guess that's what the provider is. So B-Sky, BT, Virgin Media and other UK broadband providers have been ordered by the High Court to block access to 3 music and movie file sharing websites as content owners redoubled efforts to stem online piracy. So it says Mr. Justice Arnold granted an order to 10 record labels, including EMI, Sony, Universal, I guess 6 UK internet service providers, requiring them to take measures to block or at least impede access by their customers to 3 file sharing websites. The ISPs have been given 15 working days to block access to the sites. This isn't going to stop there, folks. You understand, eventually, with all the laws getting passed, and altogether, all these different laws, the ones we've been talking about, they're going to start closing down who they don't like. And I mean that. This is the whole intention of it all. It's not the stuff about Hollywood and music and so on. It's to start policing until, if you're not authorized to be out there and backed by the big boys financially to lead people, then you're out. It's as simple as that. Simple as that. In Australia, the plug has been pulled on the solar business, the greening solar business that gets nothing but massive handouts. It says the company Unleashed Solar has gone into voluntary administration, that means bankruptcy, a day after the Consumer Business Services issued a public warning about it. Faulty equipment, rotten work, and so on. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, we're back and we're cutting through the matrix and talking about the craziness of the system. It's not crazy, it's crazy like a fox where it's all supposed to be going. And we know where it's all going to. But it's interesting in this case I was talking about too, from the Toronto Star, about the hate laws and this guy from Saskatchewan and so on, to do with the so-called homophobic, meaning you're a psychiatric illness if you don't like a certain thing. But it says here that when you scroll down, it says, In a decision, the Supreme Court went so far as to confirm that hate speech has a divisive impact on society. It also emphasized the added sway played by our digital age of social media and the internet, exactly what Section 13 of the Federal Act addresses. The court suggests, therefore, that anti-hate laws must serve as a tool in fighting those who would knowingly vilify vulnerable groups. And then it says here, the former president of Canadian Jewish Congress, it says, I guess it was, who's writing it, it says, I was its CEO, this is Mr. Freeman, I guess it was. It says, when we decided to intervene on this case, Mark Freeman, who represented CGIC in this matter before the court, explained, I think because the debate tends to focus on what groups is being maligned, we sometimes don't actually think through what the implications are. That's why the court is always very careful to separate the principle from any political debate. What's involved is not a political debate. What's involved is an attack on people based on the fact that they're members of a group. It's not just stereotyping, it's demonization. So, I don't even know why that comes into the story here at all. But it says Bernie M. Farber, formerly a CEO of Canadian Jewish Congress, has been recognized by the courts as an expert in hate crime. So a self-appointed expert in hate crime is now the expert, I guess, on this kind of expands power. You understand? So today's senior vice president with the Gemini Power Corps, working with First Nations on sustainable industries. But, as I say, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, this was as far as I'm concerned. And also, too, retirement. 300,000 pensioners in Britain, aged 70 and over, are still working as they are too poor to stop. And many women in their 70s are cleaning people's homes or offices. And one study relates to 193,000 men and 111,000 women, it says. And it says the ballooning number of older workers highlights a social revolution in Britain with people forced to work at an age when many assume they would have stopped years ago. It's compiled exclusively for the Daily Mail by the Office of National Statistics, shows that 193,000 men and 111,000 women are still working at the age of 70 and over. National Pensioners Convention warns the majority are ordinary working class people who are having to take jobs because they can't make ends meet any other way. Mind you, they have their fuel poverty, they call it fuel poverty over there, where folk freeze to death in the winters and all the rest of it because they can't afford the fuel. A spokesman added, anecdotally, that they're not exactly doing jobs like becoming the governor of the Bank of England. No, it's special qualifications for that. The ONS research also reveals a clear gap between the types of jobs that older men are doing compared to those that women are doing if they're still working in their 60s. For older men, the most common jobs are managers, directors, and senior officials. For women, they tend to do more low-skilled jobs, such as being a cleaner or a secretary. There's also over there, you see lots of guys sweeping the roads and stuff. After the garbage trucks have been, things like that. So this is a great future, that we're going into. In the 70s, they said we'd be happy to have a job. Only a few folk would have to work. We'd be served by computers and machines and robots. And we'd all walk about in Roman togas and just look for entertainment. What happened to that? From Hamish from Seattle, Ontario, Canada, it's good night. May God or your gods go with you.